I'm Dustin, and I'm with the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, as probably most of you know now. We offer free consulting and workshops and trainings, educations for small business owners, everywhere from the start of your business all the way to the end of your business, and everywhere in between. So I'm very happy to announce today that we actually just got to print yesterday our official now Guide to Consulting, which is a handout that we have that has a list of all of our current consultants and the topics and stuff that they can consult on. So make sure you grab that before you leave today. But I do always encourage you guys to, after you take some of our workshops, to do the one-on-one consulting, because that's where the rubber really hits the road for a lot of you, where you can get some ideas, get some education, get some questions from the classes. But then we encourage you to do that one-on-one and ask those specific questions to your business. So that is one of the things that we have available also at Tri-Lakes Chamber. We have Mark Biddle and Joanne Schmitz are two people that actually consult out of here, and are welcome to. You guys are welcome if you're in the Tri-Lakes area to actually meet here with some of our consultants. So we're glad to be able to work with Tri-Lakes Chamber about that. And we also get to sponsor some of these classes. They get to be free because we work with Tri-Lakes Chamber, and then ENT is our sponsor, ENT Credit Union. So I'm going to bring up DeAndre here to say a little bit about ENT.
Just a quick little word. If you are not banking with ENT, my card is right back there. ENT, many of you probably know, we've been part of the community now for over 60 years. We are the largest credit union here in Colorado. We're the largest financial institution in southern Colorado, but we keep a hometown feel. We don't want anyone to feel like they're a number, so if you are coming into our service centers, our reps, like this young lady back here, you'll be able to meet her, see her, she'll get to know you, get to know your name, and you just won't be, hello, Mrs. Richardson, come here, come up. So you will actually be somebody with us, and we enjoy that. I do business banking, personal, and lending. We've partnered with SBDC to put these on with you guys so everyone can get educated on business and many other subjects. So don't want to take up too much time. Yes, ma'am.
The best credit.
Yes.
Thank you. We enjoy that, and it makes our job a whole lot easier when we hear it. So thank you. All right. Just Dustin, turn it back over.
Awesome. All right. I want to give real quick credit to our corporate sponsors. That is El Paso County, City of Colorado Springs, Connectidot, Minority Business Office, ENT Business Banking, and the SBA. These are all corporate sponsors that give annual sponsorships that allow us to make the stuff that we offer for you free and affordable. So we're grateful to them. All right, so what else? What do you say? Without further ado, Steve Imke. He's been a small business consultant with us with the SBDC for, I don't know, 16 years you said today, I think. 16 years.
It was about 16 years.
Yeah. So he's just got a wealth of knowledge, and he's been consulting 101, but he also teaches this class and boot camp, Steps to Owning Your Business. So we're very grateful to have him, and so please give him a warm welcome.
As you all know, I own a jacket. I'm not going to wear one. It's just too freaking hot now. I'm already schwitzing just as it is right here. All right, so this is kind of what we're going to go over here today. But before we kind of go in there, I always like to start this particular workshop with a quick explanation who the heck I am, so you kind of know where you're getting this information from. So there's a little bit of a bio in there. I'll kind of elaborate just slightly on that. But essentially, I was one of those guys that really wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed growing up. I went through high school, quite frankly, was one of those C students, kind of graduated high school, was absolutely not enthralled about going to college or anything like that. I went in the Coast Guard, and I should probably even back up, tell you that when I was in high school, I was one of those students who really, even in high school, I didn't really attend very much high school, to be quite honest with you. My senior year comprised of basically a phys ed class, which was a mandatory class, an English class, and a home ec class that I took for 2 periods and took for the faculty, and then I went to our work study program. So that typically was my senior year type of a thing. But during that period of time, that work study program, I worked for a computer company. I worked a full-time 40-hour job while I was still in high school. And so when I got out of high school, I decided that I really wanted to get into computers. I joined the United States Coast Guard, where I learned to be an electronics technician. I did a bit of a tour with them. And I got out. I actually went back to work for the former company that I used to work for when I was in high school. And I started out as a course developer for them, became an educational consultant, became a unit manager, a cost center manager, and a site manager. And so I was rapidly moving up over the course of about 10 years with that particular company. What I discovered, however, was that the company started to fall on some hard times, and I would get a call from my boss back east and say, lay off 2 people this month. The next month she'd call me up and say, lay off. And I had about 60 people to start with, and I was getting down less and less people. So I knew that this was probably something I should probably start packing a parachute somewhere, but since I didn't have a college education, and I knew that the people who worked for me, in fact, did have college educations, and you know how that works, right? You don't lay off the most qualified people, you lay off the weakest people, right? So every month, kept going there, I kept getting a more concentrated bunch of people, and I said at one point they're going to ask me to shut off the light. I'm going to flood the market with 20, 30 people that are highly skilled, highly educated, you know, the best performers I have, and then I'm going to enter this market as somebody who hasn't really done work for a long time, you know, being a manager. So I started a side hustle, all right? I became an invisible fencing dealer. You're probably familiar with what invisible fencing is today, but I can tell you when I was involved with invisible fencing, you never heard of it before. It was a 2-year-old company. They had 7 years on a patent. And quite frankly, we spent the vast majority of our time doing customer acquisition stuff. So I learned a little bit about sales doing that. So I'd have minions who dug ditches for me during the day. I worked for this Fortune 100 company essentially. And then in the evenings and the weekends, I would do sales calls. So I learned a little bit about sales. Well, about 4 or 5 years into that program, they said, listen, our patent's about ready to expire. We absolutely need you to go full time because this part-time stuff's not going to work for us anymore. The patent's ready to expire. We really need somebody to hit the ground. I said, listen, I can't make the kind of money that I was making here. I said, I can't do that. So I lost my franchise. So at that point, I was like, oh boy, I just lost my parachute. I got to build another one. And I looked at the particular business I was in, and we had done some external work, and they certainly didn't know how to work outside of our company. We definitely knew how to work for our own customers in there, but not outside. And so we closed the deal, and they just didn't know. Salespeople really didn't know how to handle it. And so I said, you know what? I think if I go ahead and I talk to my boss, and I said, listen, why don't you just outsource my entire department? You can get rid of a whole bunch of heads all at once, and you know, so you can meet your quota for the whole quarter just with me and my organization, and I'll just hire these people and I'll vend right back to you. And that's exactly what happened. It took about a year for them to get on board with that particular program, but I can remember having a conversation with my boss. Called me up one day and said, hey, we had this meeting, we had this great idea, we're thinking about outsourcing one of these departments to see how that's going to work. And I went, I'm your guy. Boom, here's my resignation. And literally my boss got an airplane the next day. She laid off all my former employees. I set them in the tailgate of my new truck, and I signed them up, and they began working for me the next day. So, I had about $1 million worth of contracts to start with. I built that business to about $3.5 million. One of the things that we did, we opened up an office outside of Boston. I got a telephone call from a publicly held company outside of Boston. Said, have you ever considered selling your business? And I said, absolutely. I built it for sale. All right, I built it for an exit strategy right at the get-go. They called me up. They said, we'd like to come out there. We'd like to take a look at your business, but we have to close within 30 days. I said, that works for me. They literally got on an airplane the next day, came out. I pulled out my due diligence box. They went through all their stuff. They sat there. We said, we made me an offer to buy my business. 30 days later, it was done. I got a big check for selling my business, and they hired me as vice president of operations. We then we bought 2 other companies very similar to mine. We got about $7 million now total in organic growth. It was a publicly held company. It was in the .com era. The .com era was all about revenue. It was not about profitability. And so quite frankly, they said, do whatever you can to drive up revenue. So we went, and we built that business from 8 to 32 million in the next 18 months. All right? It's easy to do if you don't have to be profitable. Okay? How much it costs me to do that work today internally? I'll do it for less. That's basically the sales model that I went through. We had some very large clients. Many of them were quite difficult, quite frankly, and very demanding and whatnot. So, but now that company that acquired me was just acquired by another company because, again, it was at the height of the .com era. But what I discovered is they were actually hiring the XML engineers that worked for that company, not for the $32 million a year rep service business that I was managing. First off, they told me, they said, you got 30 days to shut everything down. I'll tell you, I spent about 20 minutes thinking to myself, boy, I'm getting laid off. Good thing I sure sold my company a few years ago. I still have some of that money in the bank. At least it's going to tide me over for a while because I'm probably not going to be able to get a job in the same vein that this is. But after about 20 minutes, my entrepreneurial things kind of kicked in again, and I said, called my boss back, and I said, I'd like to speak to the board. And the first questions I asked them, I said, what are you going to do with $32 million worth of contracts? You know that when you tell these companies they cannot ship their products because we do a documentation and training for them, that they're going to sue you. I said, have you thought about that? They said, yes, we have. And I said, what are you going to do about that? He said, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I said, I'll tell you what, make you a deal. I said, if I could make $32 million go away, I said, would you pay me to do it? And they said, yes, I would. So basically what I did is I took all my crappy customers and I called up all my vendors, all my competitors, and I said, hey, I got a $10 million account for you, would you like it? I got a $4 million account for you, would you like it? I got a $1 million account, would you like it? Gave all those people to my competitors, many of them eager to take them on because they were big dollar values. And I retained all the best ones for myself. And a couple months later, I'd get a telephone call from some of those bad customers, and they would say, I'm not sure, but that company that you set me up with is not performing very well. Can you help me out? And I said, yeah, but I can't do it for that same price. And so I renegotiated a new contract with them. And so I turned what was basically not profitable into something that we'll call it not quite profitable, but not losing lots of money anymore, okay? And ultimately, I told you I was perpetually for sale. Found a guy coming out of Silicon Valley, was moving here for a lifestyle change, and said, I'd like to buy your business. I said, I'm always for sale. He would say he bought my business. I was 42 years old. I now had enough money, I really didn't have to work for money anymore. I figured, listen, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. I'm not a very good reader, amongst other things. I never was very good at school, but I said, you know what, if this works, you know, there must be something to this, and I need to share that. And I always tell the joke, I said, my wife said, I married you for better, for worse, but not for lunch every day. So you better figure out something to do. So this was my something to do every day. All right? So essentially I became a volunteer, and that was about 16 years ago, to go ahead and do this. Since then, I've written about 10 different books on business, written some books outside of the business space as well, to go off and do that. Pretty much I spend my entire living, my life, doing something along the lines of entrepreneurship. Either researching it and writing about it in a blog that I write, writing a book, or mentoring, you know, or counseling clients to go off and do that. So I really want to kind of let you know that everything that I share here with you today is really based on personal experiences and much less about academic kinds of stuff, because certainly it didn't come from a college kind of a thing. Okay? So with that, this is kind of what we're going to talk about here today. All right? We're going to use the premise of a book that I wrote right here. That's how they got me to teach this class, by the way. But we're going to explore what I call the 5 customer-facing blocks. These are very important parts of the business model canvas. We'll talk about them. We'll drill down and we'll look at each and every one of them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go beyond that. We're going to take a look at the creating a minimally viable product, essentially to test your assumptions. I'll tell you why that's so important. Once we get let's say, go for scale, all right, we'll talk about some of the leverage blocks, all right, and then we're going to conclude that by looking at the external factors that will affect your business model and how you can prepare for that, all right? And then we'll conclude that with a small exercise here at the end where we're going to create this little fictitious thing, and you'll get to practice doing that. We'll break up into small little groups, and you can play with it a little bit, and I'll come around to the different groups, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and you get a little bit hands at practically applying that to a kind of a fictitious business, all right? Okay, so why is this business model such an important deal right now? Okay, quite frankly, the world has changed dramatically in the last few years. In the old days, we used to say, listen, if you wanted to be successful in business, there's just no other way but you have to write a business plan. All right? To me, I'll be honest with you, my personal opinion is business plans are appropriate, but not for everybody, not for every business. There's many people out there, just let me give you an example right here. Out of 150 million workers in the United States, do you have any idea how many of them are either freelancers or self-employed? Out of 150 million. 100? Anybody else? 62 million. You're much closer. 54 million. 34% of the working population either A, has a side hustle, or B, you know, is some type of freelancer or you know, a business owner kind of deal. That is a large number. That's, you know, if you look at a typical, you know, supermarket, looking at all the people in there, 1 in 3 people are somehow involved in that, okay? So many of these people are freelancers, all right? Doesn't necessarily require a lot of funding, those kinds of things, which a lot of people do to actually write a business plan, all right? So, with respect to that, I would also say that the concept of a business plan was all based on a much slower world that we lived in. And what I mean by that is things didn't change quite as rapidly. And so what I think about is the reasoning skills for entrepreneurship have changed a little bit. In the old days, we used to use causal reasoning, and I like to use the example of a general. I kind of put a little things in quotes to kind of give you a little synopses that you can lead, and as you review these slides when you get home, you'll go, gee, that general, you remember that little story, so you can see that throughout the whole presentation, little stories I'll tell you about each and one of these little elements, okay? If you think about what a general's job is, all right? General's job, he goes out and he's tasked with taking a particular hill, let's say. He's a logistics guy. His job is to make sure we got troops there, ammunition is there, the transportation is there, that we can evacuate wounded, all these different types of things, the food, everything. Then that takes a lot of work, a lot of upfront planning. Now the problem is, in the old days, okay, when we used to have a fortress that we were attacking, a castle on top of a hill, which is what we used to have, things moved very slowly, that was great. You could spend a whole month on the bottom of the hill organizing your army to go ahead and do that assault, but today the world is a lot different. Okay, the enemy nearly needs to move from one hill to the next hill and thwart all the effort that you've done. Okay, so today, because of the speed of change that happens, we need something that's faster, something that can react much quicker than drafting an entire business plan. Okay, to that extent, what we do today is effectual reasoning. And I liken that to an explorer. And I use the example of an explorer because I think Christopher Columbus embodies that. Christopher Columbus was commissioned to open up the spice trades. He sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and ran into this giant landmass that prevented him from getting to the Spice Islands, which are in the Pacific. Now, if he had a business plan, what he would have done is he made a left-hand turn, and he continued along the coastline all the way to South America, around the other side, the western side of South America, and eventually get back into the Pacific Ocean and continue his journey, all right? Because he had a goal that he was going after. But instead, when Christopher Columbus did, he sat there and he looked at the indigenous people and he said, these people got gold. I think my employer would just be as happy as if I filled my ship full of gold and brought it back with him. So what he did is he pivoted, all right? He saw that the world changed a little bit. He had an idea, a goal of where he was headed. But somewhere along that goal, he got additional information, and that additional information caused him to change his direction. All right? So the concept of business planning, the traditional concept of business planning, is that we anticipate everything that we want to do, right? And so I'll talk to it to the respects of causal principles is how we used to think about things. We had expected returns that we went for. So we looked for the best market. Where could we get the best return that we're out there? We also said we did a competitive analysis, right? What are the players in this particular field? How can we be more like the competitors that are in this particular field? What can we learn from our competitors? What are they doing really well? And what can we incorporate into what we're doing, all right, to also be best in breed, all right? And they would avoid surprises by trying to predict the future. That was the big deal for them, right? They wanted to be as accurate as possible to get out into the future. Today, with effectual reasoning, the principles are quite different, all right? It's about affordable loss. It's not about going like the Silicon Valley things that you see. I'm going to have this great idea. I'm going to go raise a bunch of money. From that money, I'm going to go ahead and execute on this particular idea. All right? I'm committed to execute on that particular idea. We don't do things like that anymore. Okay? It's about taking small steps. How much can I afford to spend and still keep some money in reserve? Because when I get there, I'm not sure that the path that we had originally set up is going to be the ultimate path. But we're just moving along that path, keeping our eyes open as we move in there. So how much can I afford to lose? Because I can't afford to spend it all. See what the difference is? Silicon Valley, I get a budget, I blow the whole thing, one direction, I get one shot, it's over. Okay? What we do is strategic partnerships. At this point, I'd like to add a story about one of my mentors. I had a mentor by the name of Ron Munz. I'm sure you've probably never heard of him. He's not a household name. However, you're probably familiar with his work. So let me tell you how it started. So he was a software development company. Now, let me paint the picture for you right here. The time period is at the period where mini computers, which was the company that I was working for at the time, was a mini computer. And when we talk about mini computers, I don't know if many people are familiar with that phrase, but they weren't mini at all. I mean, they were room-sized computers. They were very dedicated. They were usually at computer labs. They usually had, raised floors and, air conditioning and everything else like that. So it was very easy for a company to be able to know where all their computer assets were because all they had to do was look in the computer. We didn't have computer assets on anybody's desk. Calculator was about as big a computer as you had on your desk. So the period now is where mini computers are now being displaced by PCs. So now the problem that big companies had was understanding that, you know, the computers, the PCs that I have are now being distributed across the whole company. So I got a receptionist who's got a computer with a certain monitor, maybe she has a printer. I've got an engineer who has a different kind of computer with different kinds of software with a different kind of monitor. Does that make sense? Maybe he's got some other kinds of things that are attached. And so what this company came to is they came to Ron, and they said, Ron, I'd like you to build me a software product. Now we're talking typical gig economy like you have right there, just the spending. You would always come in there and say, listen, okay, I'll do a bid on that. I'll build that for $100,000, all right? But he said, before I go ahead and I solidify on that, he says, if you have that requirement, my guess is that other businesses do. And let's face it, controlling your assets, understanding where all your assets are, is not pivotal to your business. It's not what differentiates you. Would you agree with that? With your business. It's just something that you have to do, so it's not a competitive advantage of yours. So the company said, sure, I'll let you go ahead and find some other people, especially if it's going to cost me less at the end of the day. He found 2 other companies that had similar requirements. They combined all the requirements together, and he said, listen, you pay me a third, you pay me a third, and you pay me a third, and each one of you will own the software. They all agreed. Now you would agree with that because, again, it wasn't something that was going to differentiate them in the industry. The caveat, he said, was at the end of the day, I'll own the source code. Again, not something they were worried about, and they all agreed to it. Because Ron's idea was at the end of the day was, I'm going to go ahead and remarket that particular software. So instead of the traditional Silicon Valley model that we've all heard about, that all come onto this causal principle and a lot of the business planning stuff, was the idea of saying, listen, I'm going to go out there, find investors, build this product, and see if it sticks. He, in fact, had his customers pay for the development of it. It didn't cost him a penny. You see how that's quite different from that particular model? All right? And the last piece that's on here, essentially, is leveraging contingencies. All right? We call that about shaping the future. All right? And what we know with that is that we say where we're headed, we know is not our final destination. It's just one step closer to our final destination. But we know that as we get closer to that destination, our real destination will become clearer. If that makes any sense. So I used to be a fire control technician in the Coast Guard. Now, it doesn't mean I put out fires, all right? I had a big radar that sat on the top of our boat, and a big 5-inch gun mount that sat on the front, and our equipment basically tracked where the plane was going to go, figured out how fast it was going, what direction and altitude and everything else like that, and said, we predict, go back to this thing right here, very causal model right here, all right? We predict that that plane will be over there by the time we shoot this bullet, because let's say the bullet's it's not like a laser, it doesn't get there instantaneously, it takes a while to get there. It might travel for 60 seconds before it gets out there. And so we say, the plane's over here, we anticipate it to be in that part of the space, and we're going to go there, and we're going to shoot it down. Because let's face it, in a gun battle, he who hits the target first wins, right? There's no second place, right? Other people don't. So we spent an inordinate amount of effort, okay, planning for that one shot, right? I'll be honest with you, we never hit it on the first shot. We got close, okay? And usually that caused some other kinds of things that would happen, and that's all we really wanted to do, all right? Sometimes we would be lucky and we would hit it on the first shot. But quite frankly, that's what it was really all about, because we didn't have necessarily that second shot, all right? That was the old day, right? But we also had gunner's mates on our boat, and our gunner's mates would go ahead and they had 50 caliber machine guns. Now, if you know anything about 50 caliber machine guns, they got little optical sights and those scopes like a rifle or something like that. They just kind of pointed in the general direction, saw where the bullets landed, and did what we call Kentucky windage. They just kind of adjusted the gun until they got close to it, and then they just fired for effect, okay? That's what we're talking about today, okay? You guys are gunner's mates, not fire control technicians. Make sense to you? Okay? That's what we're talking about. That's what's changed. We need to be very responsive because, quite frankly, in today's world, those boats move around really fast. And that plane, all he had to do for me as a fire control technician was at the time I shot that gun, he just had to change direction. That bullet didn't change. That bullet was still going on that same trajectory. And we knew right away, they changed direction, wasted shot, kind of a thing. Does that make sense to you? So this is what we're talking about. So today, we're talking about being gunner's mates. All right? We're talking about being very responsive and shooting cheap bullets, seeing where they land, making some adjustments, and coming on the target. Okay, so why is this whole thing important? Because what we're really trying to find is what we call an uncontested market. So what do you think I mean by an uncontested market? Why do we do competitive analysis?
We want to see what's out competition.
The deal is, that's a wrong way to think about it. Because you don't want competition, all right? The concept of what we call the blue ocean, all right? So if you think about an ocean, because you see I'm a sailor guy, I use a lot of sailor analogies, okay? A blue ocean, right? The opposite of a blue ocean is a red ocean. And why is the ocean red? It's full of blood, okay? Your blood, specifically. Because what happens is when you're in a commodity business, in other words, you're just like every other business in your particular marketplace, how do you compete? Right? There's two things that you do, right? Either you offer more features that somebody else doesn't do, or you offer less features for less money. This is basically the two directions that you're being pulled, right? I mean, that's what you have. So everything you think about is within the confines of, well, what feature can I add that will delight my customer that essentially will cause them to want to work with me? Or what feature can I cut down that they don't use very often and create a smaller version that's cheaper that maybe I can compete more on price? But there's a whole other market. What about the people who don't necessarily use your product? All right? So let's talk a little bit about banking, since we're, Ed's sponsoring this. Let's talk a little bit about that. All right? So the banking industry, for a long time, they basically owned the merchant account business. So if you wanted to be able to take credit cards, you had to have a bank account with a merchant account so that you could go ahead and slide their credit card and take credit card payments. All right? These were designed for large companies, very large companies. They cost, you had monthly fees, you had gateway fees, access fees, and all these other kind of things that you had to pay for. You had minimums that you had to do every month. And let's face it, you have like a flea market type of business where you sell on the weekends, you'd never meet those minimums. Okay? So quite frankly, there wasn't a market there at all for those people. Make sense? Right? Square comes along and says, there's a completely unserved market for doing credit cards. What if we made an app? Right? What if we got rid of all of those high-priced fees and just built it all into one transactional fee with no minimums? Right? And we put it on your cell phone, and you just plug it into your audio jacks. It turned everybody who had a smartphone into having a cash register. You didn't need that point-of-sale terminal. All right? Did they take money away from the Walmarts and stuff like that? Did they all go to that? Heck no. They created, in fact, a blue ocean. There was no competition for them at first. Does that make sense? That's what we're talking about. This is why we talk about the business model canvas. We're trying to find our own uncontested markets. All right? That little thing that's a little bit different about your business, that's different than other businesses, and that's what you compete on. All right? And those things change quite a bit. And this is why we're talking about it. Now, this is essentially a one-page deal. So this is essentially, we're going from mass market to niche markets. I will also add that in the old days, how did we promote our business? When I had an invisible fencing business, basically my option was advertise in the newspaper, advertise on TV. That was it. I had to go out to mass markets. I could maybe target by market a little bit. Typically, I looked at my customer archetype was a intact family where the wife is home, male is at work, she's watching soap operas. I would go ahead and I would advertise during daytime soap operas because I figured if you're stuck having to take the dog out all the time and worry about the kids running in and out, the last thing you want to do, you want to reduce some stress in your life, and you'd like to have an invisible fence that goes all the way around your yard so the dog goes in and out of the house, plays in the backyard, comes in and out through a doggy door. You don't care. Right? He wants to go out and do his own business. He does it in the yard. He comes back. Right? You don't have to do that. That's who I was marketing it to. Okay? But quite frankly, it wasn't very targeted at all. Today, on the other hand, with the internet, I can find very small niche markets and I can address them. All right? I'm a bow hunter. Even with television, for example, we used to have 3 networks, right? Maybe 4, depending on what time frame it was, right? ABC, CBS, and NBC, and maybe Fox. That was it. So I knew that whatever channel I advertised on, I was probably going to get, a third or a fourth of all the people that were watching TV at that particular time. Well, what happened, right? Cable television came around. Now we had 250 channels. Now I got to try to figure out which of those 250 channels I want to advertise on. Then comes like YouTube or streaming video, and now there's bazillions of them. Now it's ridiculous, right? In terms of being able to find that. But what happens is each one of them captures a very, very small niche market, okay? I was watching a TV show yesterday and was talking about Wide World of Sports, right? Which was a show that I remember. I mean, it included all kinds of sports, right? From fishing, hunting, ski jumping, you know, Evel Knievel, okay? It didn't matter, right? That was their deal. But today, I'm a bow hunter. They have bow hunter TV, for example. There's nothing on there but bow hunter TV. I'll tell you what, when I watch a football game, I usually wait an hour into the show, and then I watch it, and I can you know, skip over the commercials, right? They call it a hopper for a reason, right? And hop over those commercials, right? But when I go ahead and I watch these shows, bow hunter TV, I watch the commercials because those commercials are talking to me, right? They're talking about, I'm like, ooh, I need that. Ooh, I want that, you know? Those kind of things. It's not that generic beer commercial, right? So we're going from mass market, which is how we used to do stuff, right? And that was the only way that we can get there, to this niche market. Again, another reason why the business model canvas has taken on an incredible amount of energy these days as we kind of move through there. So enough we're trying to sell it, is why we need to have it, and why the value is. Let's kind of get into the meat of it, okay? So this is what we're going to talk about. Principally, most of the stuff that you're going to look at on the internet will really pretty much cover what we call the 9 blocks, which are the things that inside that box. But we're going to go beyond that. We're going to actually talk about some external ones that go outside of that as well, okay? So we're going to hit them up one at a time. You can attack this from any block, but I would say if you don't know where to start, this is probably the best way to start. It's kind of work from the left to the right, and I'll show you how these things go. At first I thought, quite frankly, all the boxes were rather nonsensical as how they put them all together, but as we start talking, you'll see how those kind of play together and how that kind of makes sense. So let's talk a little about customer segments, all right? Now, I really don't want to get down into customer archetypes yet, all right? And when I talk about a customer archetype, I'm talking about, you know, demographic and psychographic information. Anybody know what psychographic information is? What's psychographic information?
Your lifestyle spending.
Yeah, so whenever you go buy something, right, there's a UPC code, and then you swipe your credit card, right? The credit card has a billing address. The UPC code of this bottle of water, whatever I do with it, right here, when let's say I was to go purchase this in the supermarket, is going to be now linked in big data to my credit card and says that I like Kirkland water. All right? Database understands that. So if you've ever thought, if you do anything but buy cash, which is the only way I can't track, all right, big data understands what you buy. So that's what we call psychographic information, all right? And that exists out there. So when we talk about customer segments, a lot of times what we're talking about is demographic, you know, which is the typical, you know, male, female, age, income levels, those kind of things, all right? Sorry. But I want to go beyond that a little bit right here. So I don't really want to get down into the weeds at this point right now. So I'm going to bring this up a little bit when we talk about customer segments, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is we'll call a mass market segment. In other words, I don't really zero in on a very specific demographic. And I put the word Blu-ray player up there because I think, as I said before, anything in the parentheses are kind of like models. So when you go back and go Blu-ray, you'll remember the little story, right? So Blu-ray players, right? Think about that. Who buys Blu-ray players? Everybody, right? Women, men, old, young, rich, poor, whatever, right? If you want to watch a DVD, right, you buy a Blu-ray player. Of course, right now it's more streaming kind of stuff, but you get the idea. It wasn't differentiated at all. It was designed for the mass market, okay? Tell you what, if you have a mass market product, license it, do something, because you're just not going to bring enough resources to bear to be able to make that happen. We're not really talking about much in the way in the mass market, but from a customer segment, sometimes your customer segments are not defined at all. They're just everywhere, okay? Niche markets. So, we're talking about 2 different things. I talked a little bit about the bow hunting thing, but is anybody familiar with the story of Nike? Okay.
Oregon guy.
Huh?
Oregon, right?
Oregon, yep. He was a track coach, and his what do you call them? Coach kids, whatever. Must be a name for them. Huh? His athletes. How about that? So I said, just got to get you involved a little bit. See, otherwise you just kind of fall asleep. All right. So his athletes would complain about shin splints, and he said, "There's got to be something to fix this." So one day, quite literally, as most brainstorms happen, right? He's sitting there. His wife is making waffles, and he sits there and he says, "Bingo!" The light bulb goes off. His wife finishes the waffles. He grabs the waffle iron. He goes into his garage and he pours some rubber into the waffle iron, pinches it down, pulls it out, cuts it in the shape of an insert, shoves it inside a shoe, goes out to his athletes and says, stick these in those running shoes. You know, honestly, they're running in like Oxfords with these things in them, right? Because we didn't have shoes. We had shoes. Not tennis shoes didn't exist then. And so he put them in there and he said, man, they said, Coach, man, this is really going pretty cool. So he tried to take this insole and go to all the shoe manufacturers and say, hey, you should buy these, you should integrate them into your products. Not one of them decided to do it. All right? So he said, well, if I really want to do this, I'm going to have to go ahead and create my own shoe company, which he did. The problem was, nobody would go into that market for one reason. And they said, you know, I think his name was Jim. They said, Jim, the problem is there's no market. It's so freaking small. It's not a mass market, which is what we go after. We're looking, that's a niche market. We couldn't sell enough to get our research and development back. So forget it, we don't want to do that. Because there was no industry for running shoes. Because people didn't run, people ran for the bus, all right? But people didn't run for pleasure or fitness, right? So what did he do? He wrote a book called Jogging, all right? He went to Europe one day, saw somebody doing it. He said, what are you doing? He says, well, we jog lunchtime, whatever. He used that. He kind of invented the term. He came back here, wrote a book. It became like an instant seller in terms of fitness thing, and he created the industry of running, all right, where people weren't literally running because they were late. They were running for enjoyment or for exercise, all right? Literally through that book, he created his own niche market. I also put Fred Bear in there because, again, it's an archery story, and I always like to bring those kinds of things in there. So Fred Bear was an Olympic archery guy. How many people watched archery in the Olympics? All right, or a couple of us. Today. But back then, nobody ever watched it. It probably wasn't even televised, right? It didn't make prime time for sure. And we didn't have any other channels, so it was either prime time or nothing, right? So he said he was an archery guy and trying to try to build this archery company, but who wants to buy it? The only people who owned bows and arrows basically were Indians, you know. And so he said he went and petitioned, I think he was in the state of Michigan, and he petitioned the state of Michigan to have a separate hunting season just for archery. Now, if you're a hunter like I am, I take opportunities anytime I can get them to go hunting. If I get an extra season, for example, I hunt pronghorn, right? Pronghorn are tough to shoot with a gun, but I'll also go try to shoot them with a bow and arrow, all right? So the idea is if you open up that opportunity for me, right, I need the tackle to be able to do that. And so by effectively petitioning the state to create a separate hunting season, he in fact created a market for archery stuff.
That's first dibs too.
Yeah, first mover, right? That kind of was in there. All right? So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about niche markets. Sometimes those niche markets are ones that you've just identified, aka the story of Square, who didn't really invent a whole lot, but they saw an untapped market, right? And sometimes it's a matter of you creating a market, a new market. Now, none of those took away from anything. Having archery didn't stop people from buying, you know, rifles and going out and shooting. It didn't stop them from doing it. It found a new blue ocean, right? When, you know, Nike was born, for example, they didn't stop the sale of work shoes or boots or anything like that. They created an entirely new industry. So it's not what we call destructive, right? We're finding a new market, a new blue ocean. Does that make sense? So today we talk about niche markets. Segmented. You have a private client service?
We do.
So what happens here? You service all kinds of bank people in there, but you take your services and you provide a special service, the premium service for your private clients, okay? Fortunately, I don't bank at Wells Fargo. I'm a Wells Fargo guy, but I'm part of Wells Fargo's private client services. I don't go to the regular bank clients. I have a personal banker, right? I have a personal stockbroker. I get calls that says, hey, you should do this, you should think about that, you should do that, right? I don't have to, fees, I don't pay any fees, everything is free because I'm part of that service. So what we've done is we've taken a market, which is people who go to the bank, right? And we've segmented them into two different groups, right? Common people, special people. Does that make sense to you? So sometimes your part of your blue ocean or your customer segment here is to take your current market and create, you know, the really low end, a middle end, or middle, and a high end, segmenting your market. Does Does that make sense to you? It's just another way to think about it. And I mention all these because any one of these might apply to your business that might take you from where the competitors are working to where your blue ocean is. Okay? So you'll see this theme repeated over and over again because we're always trying to find that one thing that you might do just a little bit different to carve out your own unique niche out there. All right? We also have diversified. All right? So when I worked for a computer company, one of the projects, there was a trainer, and I had we had these clean rooms that would build disk drives. All right? And we built these disk drives with robots. And these robots were made by General Motors. Now, wait a minute. You're saying General Motors makes cars. Well, if you think about it, General Motors was manufacturing cars. And so what they did is they invested in building robots for their assembly lines. So many of the cars are actually built, a lot of the parts are connected on there with robots that lift heavy parts, doors, windows, glass, door panels, all these kind of things that put them all into place, right? We're using fixtures and everything else. Once they had that, they had this expertise of building robots for an industry. So they found other industries that could use their robot technology that weren't building cars, right? And disk drives was one of them. And so they took their knowledge and they built robots to build disk drives. Actually, they didn't do that. They just took their consultants, sent them over to the company I work for and said, we can help you build your disk drives with robots, okay? Right? And that's what we're talking about, diversified markets, right? So you already have something in your portfolio that you do as more of a back office kind of a thing, but there's an opportunity there to actually sell that to somebody else. That expertise, that research that you've done in your particular business might be applied to another industry. Not one that's going to eat your lunch, okay, or feed on your customers, but something that's completely outside that you can go do that. Does that make sense? Just another option. And then the other one is what we call multi-sided. Think about eBay. What does eBay do? They have buyers on one side, sellers on another side, right? Do they own any products? Nothing. They just facilitate the two things together, right? They have no assets. They're a peer-to-peer business, right? Uber is another one. Does Uber own any vehicles? Does Uber have any assets? No. All they do is they take drivers and passengers, put them together. That's what we call multi-sided. So if you think about your business, they're going to fall into one of these three things. Either a niche, that you're going to go after something that's small, it's a mass market, I tend to avoid that kind of a thing. Can you take what you already do, right, and diversify and take that out? Can you take an existing market and segment that to create the premium versus the bronze, silver, and gold, platinum brands of that, right? Or can you just introduce, two groups of people? Does that make sense? All right. So we now have to move over. So we take that knowledge, all right, and we're going to move over to what we call the value canvas, all right? And so what happens is we take a look at I put customer jobs here, but it could be anything, could be consumers' jobs, whatever that may be. Whatever they do, the tasks that they perform. And what I generally recommend, and of course I really don't have time to really drill down to it in this particular course, but certainly if you come in and we have a discussion as a one-on-one that Dustin kind of talked about, we'll go into this a little bit more. We'll start to explore the customer journey and what they do, okay, through their jobs, all right, and find things that might help you uncover various things, okay? So an example I'll give you is, I just recently bought an air fryer. You're probably familiar with that, all right? All right, very interesting concept. So for years, very much red ocean kind of a thing, deep fat fryers, right? Everybody was competing in the deep fat fryer market, right? Philips was one of them. And Philips sat out there and said, man, we're going to go ahead and apply this, blue ocean strategy essentially to their particular business. And they said, okay, so here's what would happen, right? So your deep fat fryers either had more features, it cost more, or they started stripping out features. Maybe they made it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, those kind of things. That's how everybody was competing, right? But when they started to plot out the entire journey, they said, wait a minute here. First off, we don't even sell oil, and that's an expensive cost. It's not environmentally friendly to get rid of it. It poses a danger because it's freaking hot, and I can tell you what, my son blew himself up on a deep fat fryer in a restaurant. I'll tell you, it's very dangerous. Okay, so there was lots of what we call pain points that existed in the deep fat fryer market. All right, so they created a business model canvas and they laid out all those things of a typical fryer. Okay, and then what they did is they went back and they said, well, where are the pain points? How can we get rid of them? And the air fryer was ripped off from another thing here and there, plugged two things together, bingo, they had a convection air fryer, and that was born. It eliminated the oil, and the hazard. There was no additional price to cost to purchase the oil or dispose of it and do all that other kind of things. So they looked at the pain points and figured out what they could do. Now they also knew there were certain things, gains, that people didn't necessarily know even existed out there. All right. So I often, when I talk about gain points, I talk about intermittent windshield wipers. Nobody ever asked for intermittent windshield wipers, right? That came up with that. Because they said, you know what, it's not too difficult to put in, a couple components in there that let the circuit charge up for a minute. When it discharges, we'll turn it, we'll do it once, and then what we'll do is we'll sit there for a minute, and we'll give it even variable, right? So we can add a little bit more juice, and it'll charge up faster, and it'll go a little bit less time between intervals, or slow it down. Because as a kid growing up, we didn't have intermittent windshield wipers, right? I grew up in New England. It rains a lot there, not only in the afternoon, but all day. And so, and then I lived in Seattle for a while, where it rains there all the time, except for maybe June. And so, the typical driving position was left hand on the steering wheel, right hand on the windshield wiper, and you just did this the whole way, because you couldn't do that. So these are what we call gain points. So you take a look at what the jobs are, customer profile, where is the pain that they experience, what kind of gains that you're aware of that you might be able to apply from other industries and bundle them together. And then you create pain relievers and gain creators for them to create your new blue ocean. Okay? So the way we do this is we sit down here and we look at the whole customer journey. How did they make a decision to buy from us? When they purchased it, how did they use it? How did they dispose of it when they're done? Okay, we go through the whole life cycle. And somewhere during that process, we can talk about things like, can we improve on the convenience of that? Right? Can we make it more environmentally friendly? Can we reduce the tasks involved? Can we make it easier to use? Do you see what I'm saying? There's a matrix that we can literally look at all those different things, right, and find out places that we can just make a small tweak that will ultimately find us our blue motion, right? And then when we're in blue ocean, right, there's no blood in the water, so we're not bleeding out, which is essentially, fighting on margin, okay? So let's move to the value proposition, okay? So the reason I have this here is because we've got a customer segment, the value proposition, and these two blocks are going to connect the two together, all right? That's why we jump to the middle. All right, so we have quite a few different value propositions, and we'll talk a little bit about some near the end right here. The first one we'll call is new. I don't necessarily recommend this. All right? My personal experience with invisible fencing, it was a great product. Don't get me wrong. All right? And it was really, really new. But for 5 years that I was involved with that particular company, my customer acquisition costs were ridiculously high. Nobody picked up the telephone book and said, I want an invisible fence. They said, I want a chain link fence. I want a stockade fence, because that's what they saw. They did not know that an invisible fence was an option. All right? I'll tell you, I heard all the jokes. Pay with invisible money, all those kinds of things. People didn't believe. They thought it was a joke, honestly, to go off and do that. So, but it was a legitimate product to go in there. But it took a lot because it wasn't in the zeitgeist of people. You had to introduce that. And that is very time consuming. Right? I often talk, sometimes I have I'll use this end pen here, right? So this is a ballpoint pen, right? You would think when this ballpoint pen came out, right, it's a pretty revolutionary product. What did it replace from an ink writing instrument? How can I be clear there? Because everybody tells me fences, but it's not. Ink writing, legal contracts. What did it replace?
Water.
Water?
The
Yeah,
water.
a fountain pen, right? Now, fountain pen had some serious issues. Would you agree? It wrote pretty much in the vertical position. You couldn't even write it sideways like this because there wasn't enough gravity to put it to the end. If you jerked your hand a little bit or you put it in your pocket, it dripped, right? So, we always used to wear those pocket protectors and everything else to keep the ink from falling out. So you understand, that it had some flaws to it. So you would think that the time this ballpoint pen was invented, it would just wipe out that market. Wouldn't you think so? Huh?
People were used to it.
Well, they didn't know it existed. They didn't know they had the option. How many years do you think went by between the time that the ballpoint pen was invented, right, until the time that it started to show up at your local supermarket and people started buying it and people understood that this was an option for them? How many years would you say?
40 years.
10 years? Huh?
40 years.
Keep going.
Wow.
50 years. Okay? So I get a lot of clients that come here and they say, Steve, I got the great idea. All right, I got the next Facebook, I got the next thing, everything else. So then I go, well, I hate to tell you this, but you're midlife right now, you're 40 years old, maybe you start seeing something when you're 90. You know what I'm saying? it takes a long time to do that, all right? Hence the reason why patents usually last for like 20 years, okay? Because it gives you an opportunity to do that. But lest me get going on patents, 'cause that's a whole nother hot point. So the idea is new, isn't always the best to go in there. You better have lots and lots of resources. And again, it goes back to that Silicon Valley model. I got to raise billions of dollars to essentially go out to the market to create this whole brand awareness. I'm going to have to take out ads in the Super Bowl. I'm going to have to get to everybody out there just to make sure that my product is known in the masses, especially if it's new and different. Okay? It takes a long time for people to be able to integrate that into their program. But sometimes it's better performance, right? Again, I told you I used to work for a computer company, and this is how it would work. We would design a CPU chip, let's say that ran at, let's say 100 megahertz. Well, we wouldn't send the first one out as 100 megahertz. We would literally go in and take some code and put it in there and retard that chip to maybe 30 megahertz. And that's what we would sell. 6 months later, the only thing we had to do different was to put a different piece of firmware in there, and we would increase the clock speed to about 70 megahertz. And then 6 months later, we would take that exact same thing and we would take off all the chains and let it run at 100 megahertz, okay? Because here's the thing, everybody wants that bleeding edge technology, right? And so it's performance. So maybe what you have is you're just gonna build that PC, that faster thing. Have you ever looked at cars? What do cars advertise? 0 to 60 times, miles per gallon, all those kind of things. They're just trying to do better in the way of performance, either more economical to drive and lower gas fees or faster. Does that make sense to you? Again, that's just another value proposition that you can go. So how do you want to play in that particular market? Do you just want to be faster or have more performance? Customized solutions. I'm sure, does everybody have a smartphone? Okay. Right. And what do we do with smartphones, right? We download apps. And those apps are highly customizable, right? And so you may have the exact same app that I have, but it's different on your machine because you have different backgrounds, different fonts, different this, different that, right? You've got your contact information in there, not my contact information. That's some generic contact list, right? We customize those to the nth degree. So is it something with respect to your product? Can you make your product more customizable by the consumer? So if you think about Apple, right? Apple had an interesting thing. When they came out with, I can't remember which one it was, the iMac or whatever it was, where all of a sudden it was the first time that you got different colors, right? And it was still a big monitor that you sat there, but it looked more like half an egg, if you remember that. But you could buy it in blue, you could buy it in green, you could buy it in other kinds of things. Today you buy laptops, for example, and you could pick the color that you wanted or the lights that go in there. I know I just rebuilt a new PC and it was like, oh, do you want green lights on your fans or red or blue? Do you want them to change or whatever the case? I'm like, I don't really care, it's inside my machine. But I could customize just about anything in there. Getting the job done is another one. Why do people live in condos?
They don't want to have to take care of their yard.
Bingo, right? So they can spend their entire time doing what they want to do and not doing like I do, paint one side of the house every year, you know what I mean, religiously, which is kind of what I'm in the process of doing right now, dealing with yard work, doing all that other kind of stuff, because it gets the job done, right? That's why people live in condos. They want somebody else to do that, to go do that. So, think about that. Does your product or service in somehow help them to accomplish what they need without them really having to do much? Make sense? Okay. So, design. Maybe it's design that's quite different. So the Dyson vacuum, I'll use that, that's why I have that on there. Now, incidentally, Dyson is a great inventor, but he really doesn't invent a whole lot of stuff. He really takes things from one industry and applies them to another. So he worked in a sawmill, and the sawmill has this problem, it generates a lot of sawdust. How do you separate the sawdust and essentially vacuum it up from the process, separate that out, but not get you into a place essentially where, you're going to fill up a bag, right? Because that was the problem that we had, right? The problem, blue ocean strategy type of thing, or the business model canvas, was the pain point. Bags quickly got full, didn't suck anymore. So if I could get rid of the bag, what am I going to do? He looked at another industry, looked at sawmill, and they used this big centrifugal thing. So they would bring in the sawdust with the air, it would run around the outside and all the heavy particulate matter would sink to the bottom and the air would just zip right back out and go back in and circulate it, and that's how they separated it. He says, build that into a vacuum cleaner, and he created the first bagless thing. Does that make sense? So he borrowed something. So the idea is when we talk about design many times, I'm not talking about you being a design engineer, I'm simply saying, can you borrow something from another industry and apply it to yours? One of my old bosses, I remember, came out with an org chart one time, and I was like, man, this is about the most creative thing I've ever seen. You know, where did you see this? Did you know, I'm trying to become a manager like he was at the time, and I was like, you know, where do I find this kind of inspiration to go do this? And he says, well, I found this architectural digest. And I'm like, architectural digest, what is that got to do with anything? He was talking about trust systems and everything else. It was a metaphor for him to apply something else. So look outside your industry and be able to apply other things, okay? Could be brand and status. All right, I recently sold an Escalade, but if you know anything about an Escalade, it is nothing more than a badged up Tahoe. All right, it's essentially the same thing. It just has different badging on it. I probably paid $5,000 more for that Escalade because it had the Cadillac symbol on it than the Tahoe would have been. Because other than that, although they told me this was different and that was different, I don't think it added up to $5,000. You know what I mean? The headrest with the little Cadillac symbol and the thing on the front was really the only thing that gave away that it was a Cadillac, right? To go in there. And so people are willing to pay more sometimes for, you know, something that's got brand cachet with it, okay? So we'll talk about the next one, which is price. So let's talk about the two extremes right here. We have, on one extreme, right, we have Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines makes no bones about it. We just want to be the lowest cost airline provider. They really kind of introduced that to the American flying market, all right? So if anybody's ever flown on Southwest, one of the things I personally don't like, but certainly now that I understand where that plays into the system, all right, it was a brilliant thing, all right? And that's the way they load planes. Where instead of giving you a seat number, right, they give you a zone, right, and then you get in a queue, and you go in there and you can get whatever seat you want. Do you know that that simple thing makes loading a plane 20 minutes faster? 20 minutes faster. Now, it's just like a trucking industry. You only make money when that airplane's in the air, right? It doesn't do any money on the ground. So if you've got a 45-minute turn, right, or a 25-minute turn, right, that makes a big difference, right? And so especially if you're flying short hauls, kind of a thing, that's a significant difference. That's one of the ways they keep seats down, or, you know, cost per seat down, okay? It might, well, there's other things that Southwest does that I think is rather interesting, just to put it, have you ever been on a Southwest Airlines? They're, you know, this is how you use your seatbelt, this is, you know, the flotations in the bottom of your seat. It's never like that. It's like a rap song or do something. I mean, it's always an entertaining thing. I mean, I stop, put my book down and I listen to it because it's usually quite fun to go off and do it. You know, because they make it a show and they get me to watch it. And I remember that. And then I tell somebody and then somebody else flies just to see what they were doing, you know, kind of thing. On the other side, we have this Romain Jerome watch. Anybody heard that before? It's a big watch manufacturer. It makes, you know, it makes Rolex look like Timex. So to give you an example, they had one watch that they sold $300,000, and the watch didn't even tell time. They made 7 of them, sold out in 2 days. All it does is tells you work time and off time. Daytime, nighttime, that's really essentially what it is. All right? Now it happened to be made from steel that they salvaged from the Titanic or something like that, which I'm sure added to the cost of it. But quite frankly, the people didn't buy that to tell time. They bought it for what? When you wore that watch, you told people, listen, if I can afford to spend $300,000 on a watch, probably have something I got to say that you probably want to listen to, right? They were buying it as a status symbol. Does that make sense to you? So they said, obviously I know something, because otherwise you wouldn't have bought it, right? Cost reduction, right? Software as a service, right? Microsoft 360, right? Instead of you buying it, you pay a usage fee for it. If I use it a lot, I pay more. If I don't use it very much, I don't. But the fact is, it made my cost reduction because instead of having I have to pay $200 to buy a Microsoft suite or $300, whatever it costs these days, I can pay a few dollars a month, and I'm always going to have the latest and greatest. It's going to be in the cloud. I can access it anywhere, whatever the case is. You see what I'm saying? So I've turned something that's a high front-end cost to something that's an annuity, and as well as bringing the whole cost down because I don't own it anymore. I don't have to worry about supporting it or any of that kind of stuff. It might be risk reduction in the terms of warranties, right? I drove here today in my old truck. I bought that truck, quite frankly, at the time, because it's a really old truck, let me tell you, put it that way. But I bought that because it had a 7-year, 70,000 mile warranty when every other vehicle out there was 24,000 miles or 2 years. I bought it because I said, listen, if I'm going to be spending 50 grand on a pickup truck, this was in 1993, okay, it's a long time ago. I want to spend 50 grand on a pickup truck, son of a gun. I don't really want to have to worry about maintenance until I'm done making payments. You know what I'm saying? So I had a 7-year note. Actually, I didn't have 7 years. It was probably like a 4 or 5 year note. But I said, listen, I want that sucker. I don't want to know if anything breaks. I never have to pay anything other than making my payment during that particular time. It's risk reduction, right? The worst thing you wanted to do, right, was own a car and have it go to 25,000 miles and have this major problem go on. Sorry, the warranty is not there, and boom, you end up getting stuck with something, right? So maybe it's about ordering a warranty too. Most people won't even take you up on it, right? But you know, that may be a difference. Maybe your competitors don't offer a warranty and you do, right? Accessibility is another one. When I think of that, I think of timeshares. Right? I'm a sailor guy too, and so I have a charter license. But I'll be honest with you, I don't really want to sink a couple $100,000 into a boat and leave it in a marina and pay a couple other, you know, several $1,000s a year just to store it, just so that I can spend, you know, a couple weeks a year on it. So what do? You buy a timeshare into it, right? So you have a bunch of people, each one owns a share, right? Think about those vacation timeshares. You have that great place in the mountain, really nice thing, but you don't own it, you don't have all the maintenance, you don't have all the taxes and everything else, you just pay one fee, a small fee, right, relatively speaking. That's way less than the mortgage would be if you owned it, and you use it for the weeks that you have on the schedule. If you want more, you buy more weeks, if you want less, or whatever, just whatever you want. So you fractionalize the ownership of it. Can you do something with your product there? Can you fractionalize that out, okay? And maybe it is convenience, right? So think about the Apple, right? Before that, we used to have Discmans, or even before that, we had, what do they call those? Walkmans, okay? You notice they call them Walkmans, not Runmans, okay? Because especially in the Discman era, if you stepped off a curb, zip, zip, skip the track or something like that, right? You remember those kind of things? Well, first of all, how would, you know, you found a CD, right? You had one song on a CD but you had to buy the whole package, right, to go get it. Kind of like what you do with cable packages today, right? I want one channel and I got to buy 60 to go get to that one channel. Right, but that's how it was back then. And so effectively, you bought this CD and you put it in your Discman or, you know, your cassette and put it in your Walkman, and that was your portability kind of a thing. But you end up having all the songs, and you had to listen to. You didn't have any fast forward kind of functions. Maybe you could, you know, you could fast forward, but you had to stop it and listen. It wasn't very convenient. Then the iPod came along, right, and it said, guess what? First of all, it's solid state, so you can jump, jog, you know, do whatever you want because it's never going to skip on you. You know, by the way, we're going to combine that with iTunes, and if you like that one song on the album, just buy that one song for 99 cents. Why pay me $10 for 10 songs? Just buy one song for 99 cents. The convenience was incredible, and it really took Apple from what was a fringy company to something that was really quite, you know, market leader in that particular space, and they've continued to do that. If there's any one business, quite frankly, that has really embraced this whole business model canvas, blue ocean strategy type of thing, it's Apple, all right? They continually find markets, new markets, that don't destruct other markets, right? When they invented the tablet, it didn't do anything for desktop PCs or laptop computers. It created a new, completely new market. When they came out with the first smartphone, the Apple, for example, it created a new market, right? It didn't detract from the other ones, okay? All right, so now that we have picked our value proposition and we understand where we are in our customer segment, we need to kind of bring them together, okay? So the first thing is what we talk about, we call channels, all right? These are kind of in the order that you need to think about that. So the first thing is, how do I make my customers aware that I, in fact, have a product, okay? We're leaving a little bit of the blue ocean strategy here, and we're kind of more or less getting right now into ways that you would introduce any new product, okay? So how do I make people aware that I have it? How are you going to promote that, your product, all right, that goes out there? How do they evaluate your particular product or service if they don't know already about that? I mean, I love free trial. I just recently, I told you I got rid of an Escalade. I bought a Lexus for my wife, and went to the Lexus dealer, and the first thing the guy does, he hands me the keys, and he tells me, here, take it home. And my first reaction was, but you don't understand, I'm actually going to look at a whole bunch of Lexuses today, not only at your dealership. If you give me that to take it home, I'm just going to take it to the next dealership and drop it off and take their car. And I said, I'm going to start losing track of this stuff, so you keep it. But there's a reason he wanted me to take it home, all right? Because he wanted me, first of all, to see what it was like to have it in my driveway. Because once I have it, it's hard for me to get rid of it. There's a reason HBO gives you 30 days free, all right? There's a reason why credit card companies say, hey, 30-day, or 90-day, interest-free, whatever, right? It's to get you in there. And once you're in there, you don't want to revisit that decision, and because that means a failure on your part, so nobody wants to do that, right? But once you take that, just like that car, take it home, I start envisioning myself in it, and all of a sudden I'm there. I'm the guy, right? Does that make sense? All right. So do you provide them a free trial period, or how can they evaluate your particular product? The next one is, how do they purchase it? We'll talk a little bit more about that in customer relations type of thing, but let's face it, you can buy stuff either, on Amazon and have it shipped to you, right? Or you can go down to Walmart and buy it, right? So I know that if you think about how that whole thing is kind of changing right now, I got some concerns about Amazon, for example, quite frankly, because if you haven't, been aware, but Walmart bought Jet, and pretty much anything you can buy on Amazon, short of their books and some of the stuff like that, you can buy on Jet. And then, by the way, you can have instant pickup and pick it up directly at your local store, as opposed to having to wait 2 days. So then, Amazon, because it doesn't have any physical locations, said, okay, what we'll do is we're going to get this Prime thing and we'll ship it 2 days for free. Or, you buy $35 or more and we'll go ahead and ship it, to you for free, just free shipping. Well, that just matched that, all right, to do the exact same thing. So, but they don't have this distribution network that Walmart has. I mean, Walmart's everywhere. Their distribution centers are a whole lot closer. Quite frankly, if I ordered from Walmart and it didn't have it in the store, for that delivery guy to go to the distribution center and get it to my house, he could probably get it there in an hour. Right? Versus Amazon, which is, vastly distributed, that takes, shipping things to get there, all right, to go out and do that. Delivery. How do they take delivery of that? Maybe it's a simple process of the hours of operation. My son works in the automobile industry, and I tell him, I say, I really don't understand this. Why the heck are you guys open Monday through Friday, right, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and a couple hours on Saturday? Why the heck aren't you open after 5 to midnight when I'm going to be needing to work on my car, for example, or when I have time now because I'm not working to drop my car off and get an oil change or tire rotator or whatever the case may be, right? And on the weekends, when the vast majority of us are off. And sometimes it's just simply a matter of being able to change your hours. I work with a dry cleaner. You know what their big deal was? Pickup and delivery. You have a little bag, you take all your dry cleaning stuff, you put it in there, I have a hook, sends out my yard, I just hang it on there, it's a big blue bag, the guy drives up the street, he sees the blue bag, he loads it in the car, next day the blue bag's back there with all my stuff, it's dry cleaned, it's folded, it's in his thing, and I get my bag back. So, that's it, it's a dry cleaner. All he did was he changed the way the delivery actually happened, okay? And maybe it's support. I always think about, every time I think about that, turkey. When do you cook turkey? You cook it the rest of the year? I don't. All right? No. All right. I'm not what do they call that? What's that commercial? The turkeyaholic or whatever it is? I mean, I cook it once a year. I can never remember how long I cook it for, right? So what did Butterball do? It's a Butterball hotwire, right? So you call them up. Hey, got a 22-pound turkey, boom, boom. Oh, by the way, you live at 7,200 feet. Here, turn your oven up. And here's the cook time, okay? Now, they could have done it in an app, right? But they chose to do it on the turkey hotline, so they get somebody to talk to, right? Somebody else might do it as an app, okay? I buy my shoes from Zappos, for example, my boots anyway, and I do it because they have awesome customer service on the phone. I had a bout of gout, called them up and I said, here's the problem. I got the shoes, I really need boots, I'm heading out on a trip, I I need to do it. I can't fit my feet into the boots I have right now. What can you do for me? He says, well, what size do you normally wear? I say 12. He says, here's the deal. By 12, 12 and a half wide, right? One of those is going to fit, right? And here's the models. I'm going to recommend you have a zip-up side, so that way you don't have to bend your foot too hard to get it in there. I said, that's a pretty good idea. You know, we went through all the styles, and he says, buy all three, ship the two that you don't want back, free shipping on us. I thought, wow, what a great thing. You know what I'm saying? I could go do it to fit that in. So anyway, it was that kind of service that differentiates my buying experience from buying from an online, you know, guy on Amazon that sells boots, for example. So you can really call him to ask questions. And many of us have questions about that purchase process. I want to use it. I want to integrate it. How do I do that? That's really important. I just bought a new theme for my blog, right? And so I just got here a little early, as you know. And I went home and I worked with my programmer and says, hey, listen, it didn't install like they said it was going to do. Can you give me the company where you bought that from, because I need to call their support thing? And I go, good, here's the number, boom, 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 go ahead and make it, because they provided, you know, 6 months worth of support to go ahead and make sure that you can integrate that into that, okay? So in addition to channels, we also have customer relationships, all right? So the first one we'll talk a little bit about is face-to-face, right? There's different flavors of that. A personal assistant, for example, is one flavor. So if you've ever bought a car, you get a sales guy comes out, and it's not a sales guy per car, right? Sales guy comes out, what do you want, what color, what kind of brand, all that other stuff, and he takes you out and he shows you all the cars they have on a lot. And for the entire time that you're there, you have one person that you're interfacing with. Now, if you come back the next day, it might be somebody else. You know, you might request them to go back and do that, but that's generally how it works, right? You do it for a while, right, and then they go. It could be same thing like when you buy a home, right? You get a realtor for several days, they take you around until you find the home that you want, right? It could be dedicated assistant, all right? So we were just talking about private banking, right? Because I'm a private banking person. I don't go just to anybody, any teller, for example. First of all, when I go to the bank, they know me. You know, hi Steve, how are you doing? How are the kids? You know, how's that puppy you got? All this other kind of stuff, because they remember all these different things about me. It's very, very personal kind of thing. So you see, it's face-to-face, but there's two different levels of that. So that's a dedicated assistant. In other words, that's just not for a single transaction. It occurs over the life. And I'll be honest with you, in the dozen years or so that I've been there, I stay at Wells Fargo for one reason, for my investment advisor, who I particularly like. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where that is. Right? So, and I'm sure, you know, that's your shtick, right? At Ent, it's about being your friendly neighbor, being that you know, those people, to be personal, right? Those kind of things. But since I travel all over the country, are you all over the country, Ent, by the way?
Not as far as India itself. We're part of the co-op.
Are you?
So
Okay.
Co-op, you can bank anywhere.
That was another reason, personally, that I chose that. Of course, I may want to revisit my banking relationship, but anyway, the idea is it was because, you know, I own property in Virginia and Ohio and all over the place, and I need to be able to deal with banks, a bank that has branches in every one of those locations. So another one is the phones, you know, another customer relations phone. I kind of explained a little thing about Zappos. I got a little bit ahead of myself there, but again, that's, you know, accelerating on the phone support side. It could be automated systems. So you think about Dell. Have you ever bought a computer from Dell? Right? So Dell, you make decisions. It's like a decision tree. Do you want a desktop? Do you want a laptop? Do you want a tablet? You make a decision. Desktop. And it goes in there. What are you going to use the desktop for? You're going to use it for gaming. You're going to use it for video. You're going to use it for, you know, doing spreadsheets, email, network, whatever the case is. It's going to bring you into a class, and it's going to give you, you know, do you want the super fast CPU? Do you want the one that's the next generation, but it's tweaked way down, you know, whatever that may be. And so you select that. And then what happens is the choices that you get are only available for the machine that you purchased at this point. So I told you I just replaced a PC here recently, and I didn't do that. All right. I went up to Computer Micro, whatever, it's big computer store up in Denver, and I wanted to just keep my case. I had a CPU fan go bad. If you want to talk about something that's totally catastrophic for your computer, that little stinking fan that sits on top of your CPU, if it burns up and stops working, the CPU gets so hot it burns up everything in your computer. Motherboards, disk, you know, controller boards, disk drives, spindles and solid state. I mean, it just sent spike through my computer. I had nothing but a power supply and a fan was thought that was in that box. But anyway, make a long story short, I went up there. I talked with a guy who supposedly is an expert. He walked me through the whole deal. I came home, tried to put it together, went to the computer store there in Monument here, said, here I'm having some issues, can you finish this thing? He says, yeah, here's your problem. This is not compatible with that. And I'm like, great. So I get in the car, drive all the way back up to Denver to go get it. I bring the part back. But now this thing doesn't work with that. Another trip. So I made 3 trips to Denver just to do that, right? And so what we're talking about here is with automated services, Dell doesn't let you do that. They're going to build it for you only in one configuration. So can you automate that process? In other words, they looked at the pain points that people were having, and they said this was a pain point. People couldn't necessarily configure things. It was way beyond their intellectual capability to be able to understand all this stuff. How can we change that? And that's essentially what they did. Self-service, Walmart. Walmart's the king of self-service. So, I mean, I did recently bought a new TV, and so I went online, did a whole bunch of research. I knew exactly what model I wanted. So I started looking around for stores that were near me that had that particular model. And son of a gun, Walmart right here, Jackson Creek had it. That was awesome. I said, we're going to get a new TV today, honey. I got in my car, I drove down there, I went down there, and I looked out there, and I said, I don't see it. I called the guy over, you know, which is painful if you've ever been there. And I said, I am looking for this particular model TV. And I said, I saw it on your website, you have it here. He goes, well, we check in the back. He came back, he said, we don't have it. I said, really? I said, I really need a TV today, right? It wasn't Super Bowl Sunday. That happened to me once, by the way. Super Bowl Sunday, Super Bowl party, big screen, TV, it goes out. Yes, exactly. I had a little TV sitting in front of my big screen TV. It was a nightmare thing. But this was not that day. But it was still, I needed it that day. I think we were leaving on a trip or something. And I went up and I said, well, what can you tell me about these other TVs here? No lie, the guy told me it was a color TV. That's about as much information as he could give me. All right, like I couldn't tell that it was a color TV. Like I don't sell black and white TVs at all. He knew nothing, nothing. And he was a TV guy. All right, maybe he was an inventory guy. I'm sure he probably came over from camera. Maybe he came over from grocery. I'm not really sure. But the deal is, if you don't know what you're going to buy, don't expect service at Walmart because they're not going to be able to explain something to you. Quite literally, I was very freaked out. Got in my car, drove down to Best Buy. Total opposite type of an experience. I went in there and told the guy, I said, here's the TV I'm looking for. I said, do you have it in stock? He said, yes, we do. We have 7 of them in stock. He said, but before I go ahead and get that out of the warehouse, tell me what you're going to use it for. I started explaining some things. He goes, I'll get you that TV. Let me tell you what. This TV, I think, would be better for you. And he gave me all the different reasons why. And I went, yeah, but I didn't do any research on that TV. I didn't know whether it's really good or whatever, what the reviews are. And he said, so here's the deal. He gave me a tablet, right? He put me in the theater area there, put my feet up, got me a thing of water, gave me some websites and said, listen, as long as you want, go to all these websites here, you know, can do these reviews. He gave me a couple of URLs to look at. Feel free to look at, you know, CNET and all these other kind of things to find out all these reviews and whatnot. And sure enough, when it was all said and done, I go, son of a gun, that's a better TV than what I wanted. So I didn't know enough to ask all the questions, you know what I'm saying? But he, in fact, so I thought if I'd have bought that one at Walmart, I probably would have been happy, okay? But quite frankly, he educated me into that. And that was an awesome experience because not only was the TV better suited for what I needed, it didn't cost as much. It was actually less expensive. So, anyway, and perhaps another one is communities, okay? So does anybody ever go on forums like Reddit or any of those kinds of things, right? So if you know anything about those platforms, I mean, they don't really provide any content. It's just a way, it's a multi-sided platform in a lot of respects where people can go ahead and comment about certain things and go back. And so a lot of times I spend a lot of time on the entrepreneurial subreddit, for example, out there where people have, hey, I got this business, I have this problem, I don't really know how to solve that, you know, and then people go in there and help them answer those kinds of questions. I say, here, I got a blog post I wrote about that, you can go ahead and look at that, or here's what I would recommend, or something along that line. And so you're building a community, again, all you are the facilitator, okay? You're not actually doing anything except for facilitating the ability for people to communicate. And so that may be, maybe you have a Q&A spot on your website where maybe you're not the only person that answers the questions and other people have the opportunity to answer the questions about whatever service or product that you have. Does that make sense? And similar in communities is what we call co-creation. Slightly different would be like YouTube, right? So again, YouTube doesn't create a video, right? All they simply do is they provide a platform. Again, it's a multi-sided platform that allows you to take your content and put it up there, and they just act as the distribution arm, the network to go off and do that. So maybe that's another element that you have, okay? So the last one of the 5 customer blocks is what we call revenue, all right? So I want to talk about a couple different ways of revenue, all right? Most of us will leap right to the transactional type of a revenue thing. And so when I think about transactional, it's just a one-time scenario, and a lot of times we think about it in terms of an asset, right? I have this asset, you give me money, I give you the asset, have a nice day, and we never talk again, right? I mean, that's a typical thing. So a car, you own it. Once you own it, you can do whatever heck you want with it. You can bedazzle it if you want to, or you can sell it. You can dismantle it, put aftermarket parts in it. It's yours. You can do whatever you want. We also have, on another transactional level, we have brokerage fees, right? So if you think about a real estate broker, they don't charge you anything really, right? They charge the seller a brokerage fee once they complete that deal, right? So if they're successful, they get a brokerage fee, right? And it's a transaction. So once you've made that transaction to purchase that house, typically you don't see that person again. Now maybe you remember that person and you get ready to sell your house, you call them up and you ask them to list your house. But quite frankly, it's about transactional. It's not about an ongoing kind of a relationship. And the revenue is one customer, one source of income, a new customer. So customer acquisition cost is a big part of that. It could be reoccurring. And there's a couple different types of reoccurring models that we go. It could be a usage fee. An ATM is kind of a usage fee. If I use it once, maybe I get one ATM cost. If I use it 10 times, I get 10 charges. So if I use it a lot, I pay more. If I don't use it a lot, I don't pay a whole lot. So it's a reoccurring fee. It's ongoing, but it's based upon my usage. Versus a subscription fee, which is slightly different. But I think if you consider things like Netflix, right? I pay $10 a month for, let's say, Netflix streaming, or $11 or whatever it is these days, and I can watch as much as I want. I can watch none. I can watch, as many things as I can get done in a month. I mean, I can have it constantly streaming the whole time, right? Does that make sense? So I pay one fee for unlimited, or I pay incrementally for each time I use it. But again, they're reoccurring. Does that make sense? They go on over, and it's not a single transaction. And sometimes they're both. Sometimes we combine the elements of both of them. And so when I think about lending, leasing, those types of things, I get exclusive use of a rental car, but I never own it. But there's nobody else ever going to use that while it's under my contract. But as soon as I'm done, they turn it over, somebody else drives that car, right? So I get exclusive use for a very long or a very short period of time. Same thing with like an apartment, right? You rent an apartment, nobody sits down there and says, hey, guess what? We just bring you a new roommate. I mean, you got exclusive use of it. Licensing is another option, all right? Many people come to me with product ideas. I simply say, listen, licensing, don't bother, trying to build a company around that. And what licensing is usually is you go ahead and give some other third party permission to use your IP, or intellectual property, right? So that they can use it to make money for themselves, right? And in turn for that, they give you what is called a royalty, which is a percentage of the revenue that they generate. It's revenue based on revenue, not expense, not profit, because profit can be manipulated. Revenue is just basically what they sold it for. So it's usually a percentage of revenue to go off and do that. And so maybe you get 2% as a royalty for something that you license to them, and let's face it, you have no risk and you get 2%. That's not a bad deal. When you consider that if you own all the risk, maybe you're getting 5 to 7%, right? And you built all these expenses up. You let somebody else do all of that, and you have really no risk, and you get 2%. And then you just spread that out over many different things. You're better off, I think, in that scenario. And the other one that's a both is what we call advertising. In other words, I own eyeballs, and I'm going to go ahead and share eyeballs for a fee. So you pay me money, I let you get access to my eyeballs, right? My eyeballs are my fans, my followers, you know what I'm saying? I kind of do that, right? Okay. So at this point, I got a little bit more here, I'm sorry. And I don't know why this, Is that okay with you? I mean, I just noticed it has the slides on the side there. Did that change somewhere along the line there? I thought, I'm not sure. It may have been like that the whole time. I just noticed it just now because I saw it slide up on the side. Okay, so we have fixed pricing or dynamic pricing. Oh, that's even better. A little bit easier. Thank you. I'm very tech unsavvy, believe it. So let's talk about fixed pricing. The first one we'll talk about is list price. So if you go to a restaurant, for example, they have a menu item, they usually have a dollar value next to it. Except if you go to the really fancy places, they don't. Right? If you've been to a really fancy place, they have no price next to them. You don't have no clue what it's going to be. But usually they have a list price, and it's not like you negotiate it, right? It's like you say, oh man, I don't know, $11 for a hamburger, I think this is a little too much. I'm not 9. You know, you just don't do that. You pay the going price. It's a list price. It's a restaurant. That's what I think about when I think about list price. It could be product feature dependent, right? If you go into a butcher shop or a supermarket, you have different grades of meat that you can buy, right? You can buy choice, prime, select, whatever those are. And the different grades come with different marbling, different flavor profiles, and you charge differently. Does that make sense? It may be within, like if you're taking a cruise, different staterooms have different values to them. You want an inside stateroom or an outside stateroom? They cost a little bit more because the outside stateroom has a window and the inside doesn't, right? So there's an additional feature, you're going to pay for that. So we have lots of different prices depending on what level you're on, whether you're inside, outside, closer to the kitchen, or the restaurant, farther away, closer to the kids zone, closer to the casino, whatever those might be. Everything that's important to you, they're going to go ahead and figure that out, and they've got a room for you, and it's got a special price to it, okay? Could be customer segment dependent. So you go to a restaurant and it has a senior discount. They're still serving the same meals, right? And especially if you go to something like a country buffet, right? You can eat as much as you want, right? So that's certainly not giving you a smaller portion size, right? But the deal is if you're a senior, you get 10% off. Same kind of thing with military discounts. A lot of companies offer a military discount. It's the same thing they offer everybody else, okay? But they offer a certain segment a different price. I'll be honest with you, I just, a little personal thing here, I just had my mom in a skilled nursing facility, and I've just realized how Medicare is really driving up our medical costs. Because something that cost me $600 a month, Medicare got $100. Now the reason I pay $600 is because it really cost them $300 to deliver that, but Medicare only pays them $100, so they lose $200 when my mom gets it. But when I need it, for example, I got to subsidize her to do that. Does that make sense? The more people that are on Medicare, obviously, the more subsidies. You know what I mean? I'm just waiting for all these old guys to die off, and now the new people that are paying, boom, my health care is going to go way down. That's what I'm waiting for. But I got to live to 100 to have that happen. But anyway, that's another story. Because I am one of those old timers that kind of goes in there. But you see what I'm saying? So customer segment dependent, all right? So maybe your price is differentiated based on who those people are, all right? And they all have reasons for doing that. Let's face it, seniors don't quite eat as much. You know, when I walk into a country buffet, they go, oh. You know, right, that's it. I'm going to eat my weight, right? But, you know, I take my mom, you know, she doesn't, you know, that's what she eats. You know, just a little bit. Kind of thing. All right, could be volume dependent. Has anybody ever bought business cards in Vistaprint? What's the cost differential between 250 cards and 500 cards? Like $1?
Yeah, it's not
It's
much.
ridiculously everything. How about when you go to McDonald's? You like supersize that. Or you want to go to Wendy's, you want to biggie size that. Right? They're trying to get you to move upscale, right? Because they make it so attractive to move up and get something that, you know, I eat at Subway. I have a hard time. I need a 6-inch sub. I need a 6-inch sub. All right? But I go there and I go, are you kidding me? I spent $6 for that sub. For $8, I get an extra, twice of it. I can't resist that. I can't resist it. I go in there, I want it 1 foot. And then it's all done. I've consumed the whole thing and I feel like crap for the rest of the day. You know, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. I got to go work out now. You know, something along that line. You know, I got to pay the piper for those kind of things. So volume dependent could be things. So again, why is that? Because we're spreading our customer acquisition costs across a different thing. People way underestimate what it costs for customer acquisition. Right? To get a new customer to come into your door, right? to get them to buy from you, right? That's incremental, right? But you have to spend a lot of money marketing, all that stuff. Marketing, advertising is all part of that customer acquisition piece. All that stuff gets paid for in there. And if I get a customer and they're already there, they're going to buy from me, if I just move them upscale, I can do that very cheaply, okay? We also have what we call dynamic pricing. In other words, these prices aren't fixed in any way, shape, or form. Again, it could be negotiated pricing, right? When you buy an automobile, who pays the sticker price on an automobile? I mean, I know there's some places that say, hey, listen, this is it. This is our price, kind of a thing. But most of the time, I mean, when you think about automobiles, you go in there and go, oh, man, I don't know, this guy up there, he has one a little bit less, and it's got this kind of thing. Well, how about if I cut this $500 or actually what they do is they say, well, we'll talk to the sales manager, let somebody else do that kind of thing so you can come back and you don't yell at him so he still becomes a friendly guy. I understand how all that works, right? But we call that negotiated pricing, okay? Yield management, airline tickets. I'm pretty convinced there's no two people on an airplane that pay the exact same price for an airline ticket. I just recently took my mom out to Florida to visit her cousin. Now, my mom's 91 and her cousin is 96. My mom's relatively blind, so I have to do a lot of things for her. So I was her seeing eye dog on the airplane. And so my aunt lives down in Florida. And so I went online and I looked up airline tickets, Denver to Miami, Florida. $40 away. I was like, wow. So I called my mom up. I said, hey, Mom, guess what? We're leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning. We're going to get there. We got this thing. I had to run a car, do all this kind of stuff. Make sure that, you call my aunt, make sure that she's all good for these days or whatever the case is. My mom gets on the phone. She calls me back 15 minutes later. She goes, we're good. I say, awesome. I get online again. One of those $40 tickets became an $80 ticket, right? Now, the rest of them were still 40. But the idea is, it is based on yield management. Somewhere between the time that I saw it for 40, somebody bought that $40 ticket, right? And so they have these curves. They know that within so many days or so many hours before the flight leaves, and they have so many seats, there's an algorithm that they play with that adjusts the price of those tickets up or down so they can maximize the number of seats that they have. And so the best time to buy a ticket, quite frankly, is like at the gate, right? When that plane is ready to leave, and it's either going to be with you on it or not at that point. If you don't just take that seat, it's going without you. So that $40, for example, is $40 they didn't make. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't affect them in any way. So, but if you want to make that ticket 24 hours ahead, like somebody's passed away or something like that, maximum. You have really no choices, that kind of stuff. You want to fly on Mondays or Fridays, those are business people that buy those tickets, right? Not consumers, because us consumers, we travel between Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? Because that's when we do that. So they understand that. They're extracting everything. It's dependent on essentially, their yield management of what's going on there. So, again, going back to why we're even having this conversation, can you adjust your prices based upon the yield that you have? I always say, I remember that right after September 11th, I went to a flag store. I have a tattered up American flag, and I wanted a new flag to hang up there. You know what they had done? And I thought, wow, this is really, he said, yeah, some guy came in, he bought everything I had, entire inventory. And I go, I'd probably buy that thing for him now on eBay. You know what I'm saying? You didn't do that. I said, if it was me, I'm always the guy that's going to give business guy advice, right? So I said, if it was me, when that happened, I said, I'd just taken everything that was on my shelf and just added a 0 to it. Everything in the store is an order of magnitude more because it became really popular and the line was out the building. So, same thing, if you go to like an Air Force football game or a Broncos football game, right? And it's a really cold day. Coffee's a premium, right? Cold water, not so much. On a really hot day, water's a premium. Hot cocoa, not so much. You know what I'm saying? So you adjust your prices based upon what that is. As sick as it sounds, a diabetic needing a candy bar, you know what I mean? I'm going to sell it to them for the maximum amount of money that I possibly can. You know what I mean? Because to me, if I don't capture that, somebody else will. Does that make sense as a business? So it's about being able to do that. Could be real-time market pricing. So the stock market is a good example of that, right? So the stock market is, based on who wants to buy stock, the futures, all that other kind of stuff that kind of goes in there. I'm an oil and gas guy, oil and gas prices go up and down, very, crazy kind of stuff. And that either makes people in the market or out of the market. Quite frankly, I can't get a barrel of oil out of a well in Kansas to a refinery in Houston, Texas, if the price of oil is below like $55, I can't make a penny on it, right? But quite frankly, if you were in Saudi Arabia, quite frankly, you suck that out of the ground, put it on a ship to get it to the port in Houston for $5. God, ridiculous. You know what I mean? In spite of the fact they have to cross the entire ocean to get there, right? But, you know, long story. But, so those are what we call commodity price. And then the last one is auction pricing, right? And you all know about how that works, right? eBay or whatever the case is, you get in an auction type of thing, and people bid up the project, and if people want it, they pay for it. If they don't, they don't, okay? So at this point, we've gotten what I call the 5 customer-facing blocks, all right? And I think these are the most important ones. So if you do nothing more than to use this to help find your blue ocean, these are the 5 blocks that you absolutely want to go ahead and deal with, okay? But at this point, if you remember, one of the things that we talked about, which was respect to one of the reasons that we do this and why the world has changed, all right, is related to the fact that the world changes and we make certain assumptions and we need to test these assumptions, okay? So with that, what we do is we want to create what we call a minimally viable product. So on one extreme is a crappy product. I hope I can use that word, all right? Something that nobody would ever use. And then there's a product that somebody would use, but it's got to be way funded more than we could ever produce to go in there. Somewhere in the middle of that is what we call the minimally viable product. Something to test your assumptions, all right? To make sure that what you're doing. So remember, if we go back to that whole concept of affordable loss and effectual thinking, reasoning, we want to talk about getting an incremental step, stopping, looking around, making some observations, and then determine whether our path is still true or whether we need to perhaps take a slight detour, pivot that kind of goes into another direction. Okay? So how do we do that? So we want to test the assumptions. This is one way. You come up with an idea, an assumption that you want. You build something to test that. So if you want to open up a restaurant, you think, hey, I think if I open up a Greek food restaurant, people will buy that. What I recommend is you make a couple Greek recipes, go downtown, make a little serving things, hand them out, get people's impressions, see what they have to say. All right? Get that information. You build something, some type of product, measure the results, use the data to learn from it, and it's a kind of an iterative type of a cycle to ultimately learn. Because you're going to have lots of assumptions that are going to go in there. Okay? So at some point you're going to get to go to scale. All right? Now we're saying, listen, I've tested it. I believe this is a true statement. Let's go ahead and make that. Now, I will add one other thing here. Has anybody ever read The 4-Hour Workweek? There's an interesting, what he calls a 3-page website to test your hypothesis of your business. So I think it's time to share a C story here. So I told you I was an oil and gas guy. The way I got into oil and gas, well, frankly, I sold a bunch of real estate. I was sitting on about $500,000 worth of capital gains. I needed to either reinvest that or something. I could see the end of the housing market kind of a thing, and I had done a bunch of things like that, so I ended up selling these properties to go do that. I didn't know that I really wanted to get back into real estate. So I started looking at other alternatives, and I started looking at oil and gas. So I went down to an expo down in Houston, Texas. 1,800 people that are involved in the oil and gas industry, not people, booths in this expo, all trying to hawk their hole in the ground, right? There's usually for insiders. I was a wholesale buyer, not a retail buyer, so that's why I went down, because I had $500,000 I was going to invest. It didn't take me very long to come up with a total pivot in my thinking process. I'm a documentation and training guy, right? And so what I discovered was that, these sales guys spend most of their sales call talking about things that are generic to the oil and gas industry. Where do we find oil? How does it affect my alternative minimum tax? How do I get it into production? How long does it before I get paid? All these other kind of things that everyone in the industry pays the exact same thing. So I did a pivot. I said, you know what? I'm not going to buy any oil things today, but I'm going to go out and see if I can go develop a training program and sell it to every one of these people. Every one of those people I went to explained my value proposition. They said, you build it, I'll buy it. You build it, I'll buy it. You build it, I'll buy it. I left there Great, right? Still had to do some investing. I ended up buying a commercial piece of real estate that had a 15-year lease on it. I was like, okay, good. I don't have to worry about that. Uncle Sam's not going to get their hands in there. I'm going to spend the next year developing this training program. I got in my motorhome. I drove all over the country. I was a videographer in a previous life. I videotaped all these people, pulled together hundreds of hours worth of video, edited it down to about 2.5 hours worth of video, went back 1 year later with a stack of DVDs. That's what we had. The streaming video wasn't around back then. I went down there and I said, you remember this conversation we had last year? Here it is. You know how many I sold? None. Right? Because there's a huge difference between somebody saying, you build it and I'll buy it, and somebody willing to exchange dollars for that. So that gets me back to that 4-hour work week story. Okay? So in there he talks about a 3-page website to test this. And the first page is what we call a long-form sales page, which gives the buyer everything that they want to know to make the decision to buy that. I know you've seen these on the internet. Usually they have a little paragraph that says, buy me now, and then if you're not convinced, you keep reading. There's a whole bunch of more information that says, now, buy me now. Not convinced yet, keep going. We got a video, got all this other kind of stuff. A little bit further, buy me now, buy me now. And eventually, it's a big long page, you get down to the bottom, right? At some point, you're going to click on the buy me now button, hopefully. It's the page 2, which says, give me your credit card information. Third page says, sorry, out of stock. Okay? So what we've done is we've circumvented, this is how I learned this lesson, we've circumvented that whole idea that says if you build it, I'll buy it, and we've actually identified people that were willing to exchange dollars for that, right? So when we build big construction projects in the real estate business, we do pre-sales, right? We do pre-sales. So we're going to build a condominium downtown in Denver. I almost got involved in one of those. They do all pre-sales. So they have, let's say 200 units in this high-rise, and they don't break ground until they've sold 100 of them. Now, they might have sold for $350,000 each, which is what they were at the time, but if you put a $35,000 deposit on it today, you could buy it for $350,000, but when it got done, it was going to be $400,000, $450,000, so you were effectively buying it at a discount, but on today's prices, because it wouldn't be done for another 3 years. Does that make sense to you? But at least you got people's commitment. If they walk away, you got that. Now, the beautiful thing that is now I take those people and I go to Ent and I say, now I need the rest of the money. And they're going, oh, you already pre-sold all these different things, right? If nothing else, you've got $35,000 from each one of these people, at least we won't go bust on this thing. They're not going to walk away from that. You see what I'm getting to? To go off and do that. So that's the whole idea of being able to understand when you're doing the testing is to make sure that you can understand that, not just listen to what they have to say, but make sure that they're willing to take out their wallet. So if I went back to that oil and gas thing, knowing what I know today, all right, I would have pulled a blank DVD out of my bag, right, with a label that I produced, and I would have said, I have your solution right here, right? Here's an order form. Would you fill it out? If you picked up a pen to fill out that order form, I'd have probably said, yeah, but this is my demo copy. I'll send you one for a while, but I'm coming up with version 2, so if you hang on, do you know what I mean, I'll give it to you. But I would have just seen your commitment to being able to write me a check, you know what I'm saying, to be able to do that. If I hadn't received that, that's what I should have done, even though I had nothing there, okay? So I tell that to people all the time. They go, oh, I got this really great idea, I want to go out there. I say, fake it. Go out there. See if somebody will be willing to pay for it. I work with somebody who is a piano teacher, and so she came up with a tool. She had an online tool that people could go ahead and sign up for, to what time, scheduling tool. And this was years ago. And it was like, hey, this could be a product. You know what I'm saying? Let's see if people are willing to actually exchange money for this. See if you can't sell it without having it. So it was really a total back-end kludgy thing where literally people would enter, make this request. She would type it in, so it was just a total fake thing, just to see if people were willing to go off and do that, just to verify that people were willing to buy that product. So what I'm trying to say is, don't just rely on their words, okay? Got it when they exchange money. So now we got this thing, we're going to go to scale. Now we're going to leverage these blocks. I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit faster. So sometimes, right, your industry has physical resources, right? Walmart, in respect to that Amazon thing, right? Amazon has resources, Walmart has other types of resources. Walmarts are everywhere, right? They have a geographical footprint in just about every small town in America. Amazon, not so much, okay? So, how can they leverage their buildings, their vehicles, their machines, their distribution network in a way to do that, right? I put the slide together a long time before this whole jet purchase actually came about. And that's exactly what they did. They said, no, we're going to leverage what we have. And if you think about the days of drones and everything else like that, quite frankly, it won't be long before my Walmart right here in Jackson Creek will be able to deliver something with a drone and drop it off on my deck instantly, not instantly, but near instant, less time than it'll probably take me to drive down there and pick it up. All right, where Amazon, I still have to wait 2 days. Okay? Could be intellectual resources. Apple has a closed network, right? You can't buy anything that works in an Apple that's not somehow connected to Apple, right? It doesn't go out to the third party out there. Quite frankly, that was a model that had outlived its usefulness. Somehow Steve Jobs ignored that and actually came back and he's done a wonderful job of it. So to be able to do that. But they have brands, patents, customer databases, and you know, my mom's, again, I use my mom as an example. My mom's an Apple girl, all right? I could never blow her out of that Apple environment at all. I mean, she's committed to it. She says, well, honey, why would I want to buy a PC? I said, it's a lot cheaper than your Apple, you know? I said, well, what am I do with all these apps I have, you know? And I'm like, okay. You know, I know how it works. I know the interface. I know that. Of course, now she can't see it anymore, so it's all moved. But anyway, it could be human resources. Roche Pharmaceuticals was one of my clients. You know, they have some stellar engineers. I mean, if you are Elon Musk, for example, you have some rocket guys there that are working for you. You've got some solar and battery guys that are unique in the world, right? I told you earlier that my company was acquired. My company was acquired, but then the acquiring company was acquired. They acquired them because at the time, they owned XML engineers, and half of all the XML engineers on planet Earth worked for that one company. And that's what they were buying, was access to those engineers, okay? Not anything else. So sometimes it's the human resources that you have, and sometimes it's physical resources, right? Verizon has lots of cash. They get paid every month by us, right? What do they do with that thing? So they buy that smartphone, and then they lease it to you over the next 24 months. And by the way, that locks you into a 24-month contract, right, with that, because you make payments over the whole thing, right? But they're using their financial resources to go do that. So are there resources, key resources that you have, okay, or that you can get a hold of that helps leverage you and creates a bit of blue ocean for you, okay? Perhaps it's key activities. Maybe you're just really good at operations or really good at marketing or any one of the types of things that really are important for business. And that's what separates you, right, from your market. Or maybe it's key partners that you have. So I want to make a distinction now between partners and suppliers, okay? So when I think about a supplier, I think of a commodity type of a thing, right? I can hire you, I can hire somebody else, but it really doesn't matter to me, and we're not connected in any way because you're just gonna, it's a transactional, one-time thing. It's not reoccurring type of a thing. So whenever somebody is in a transactional model where it's not reoccurring, generally I would consider them a commodity kind of a thing, or a supplier. But a partner is different. A partner has a vested interest in what you have, okay? It could be to optimize your expenses, all right? So dealing with, I was building waterfront properties on Chesapeake Bay, and I would have various contractors that I would work with, right? And the dirt work guy is one of them. He also does some stuff in oil and gas, well, right? So if I continue to use them each and every time, so they know that next house, I'm going to use them again, next house, I'm going to use them again, or next well, I'm going to use these guys. Each and every time, right, they're partners of mine. They're not going to chisel me in a deal, right, because it's very important, because they know there's another job and another job and another job, right? See, I say that's a partner as opposed to a single transaction. Maybe the partners were risk mitigation, right? We all are aware of the market crash that occurred. And the reason is because lenders, we'll call them mortgage houses, Countrywide, for example, comes to mind. Countrywide would issue you a mortgage, right? They didn't care whether you made a payment on that thing, because immediately upon you closing that, they sold that to somebody else. They put it into what they call tranches, so they sit there and they go risk, no risk, high risk, whatever. They divided them up, put them into bonds, and then they sold them. High interest rate because there's lots of opportunity for default there, not very high risk of default, lower interest rates or whatever. And they packaged them all up and sold them like that as mortgage-backed securities. Okay, so in cases, sometimes your partners are there to mitigate your risk, right? Because as soon as you do something, you can turn it over. And sometimes it's a unique connection, right? One of the reasons I bought my truck was the warranty, but it was also because Cummins, what's the premier company that deals with diesel engines, for example? I could have bought a Ford. Anybody have a Ford pickup truck? Okay. I could have bought a Ford. But I didn't buy a Ford because the Ford diesel, because I wanted a diesel because I was hauling a boat, had a big sailboat. It was a gas engine that was converted to a diesel at the time. Okay, so I'm just trying to say. But I knew that Cummins, it was designed from the scratch to be a diesel engine. So sometimes that partnership can do this. So can you find a partner, right, that makes you unique in your industry and gives you a blue ocean to see what I'm getting to? So Cummins signed a contract with Dodge so that no other company, no other car manufacturer could use what they had. So what I'm getting toward, and that made the buying decision for me to choose Dodge over Ford or Chevy. All right? And then we're going to talk about cost structures. We're not talking about your expenses here, but we're talking about cost structures. So we have companies that are what we call cost-driven. Walmart is cost-driven, right? Everything it does is to try to keep costs down, right? Southwest Airlines would be another good example of that, right? Automation, outsourcing, everything they do, right? And they get a lot of bad press for it, right? We don't pay our employees enough, we don't give them benefits, you know, all those other kind of things. But again, that's why we go to Walmart. We go there because it's cheap, right? That's what their deal is. It could be value driven, right? Rolex, right? You buy a Rolex not because Rolex or Timex, they both tell time. In fact, I don't even use that. I use my cell phone, quite frankly, to tell time. But the idea is it's about the cachet that comes there. It's quite different. It's what I call customer intimacy as part of that value proposition, right? Some stores you go into, I kind of even talked about in the banking relationships. When I go into the bank, they know my name. Right? They know me by my first name. They know things that are going on in my household, my family, and stuff like that. So maybe I make some, because I'm there every 2 or 3 days making deposits, but you know, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, they understand me. And it's customer intimacy that kind of goes in there. And usually those are reserved for what we call premium products. And then we leverage all of those, right, based upon our key resources, activities, and partners that we do. Okay? So we've kind of talked now about everything that's in this block, and in most times right now is where most conversations about business model canvas end. What time do we start? 1:30?
Yeah, 1:30. So 7 minutes.
Jeez. Well, no, just to the exercise.
Right.
Just to the exercise. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to go really fast through some of these other kind of things. I'm going to take a few more minutes because you know we don't generally take a whole hour to do that. So I really want to kind of drill down here to kind of talk about some of these other issues. Okay. So let's talk about external forces. So what we're talking about now are things that I do not control. So everything in this block here, this color block, are things that I can control. But there's certain things that are outside of my control that I can't control. And that's what we're going to start talking about right now. Okay, I'll try to go a little bit faster so we have some time. But so first of all, market forces. We have fads, right? Cupcakes. Remember a few years ago? Every other client that I saw wanted to open up a cupcake business. I haven't seen the cupcake business in a couple of years. You know, it was Froyo for a while, frozen yogurt. You know, everybody wanted to have a frozen yogurt. It was either cupcakes or frozen yogurt. That was pretty much all my clients for a long time. I don't see any of them anymore, right? I sometimes call that the circus comes to town kind of a thing because everybody thinks, oh, great, you know, everything's done there. But you don't build a new restaurant in front of where the circus is because by the time you get done, the circus is gone, right? And that's kind of where this thing goes. So sometimes they're fads, okay? Sometimes it's market segment, demographic, psychographic, kinds of information that changes, that occurs there, okay? People get older, right? Sometimes they have more disposable income, they have less disposable income, that kind of stuff, all right? And we want to market, we want to take a look at are those industries growing or in fact shrinking. We'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide as we kind of look at some of the trends there, okay? Maybe there's needs and demands. This is really where the rubber meets the road here for this piece right here, okay? Zipcar, are you familiar with Zipcar, right? It's like a rental car, but you rent it by the hour. You don't need insurance. You don't need anything. You just do the whole thing, right? You go get the car. Even if you think about little things like even in the rental car business, right? Enterprise is different than Avis, right? Because Enterprise picks you up at your house, right? So when your car don't start and you want to go rent a car for a while, it's kind of a hard thing to get from your house to the rental car place to go get that, which probably means a drive to the airport or something like that. And, you know, where Enterprise, you call them up, they show up with the car, you drop them back off, you're finished, you go do that. It's a different, just a little thing creates a little bit of blue ocean that, you know, you don't have to compete in there to go do that. So what we're talking about is unsatisfied needs that are out there. That, to me, if I put a big circle on it, that's one of the things that we live in here, okay? Switching costs maybe is another avenue, right? I mentioned my mom with the Mac thing. She will never switch because she's got too much invested in software, Mac software, that she can't port over to go do that, okay? Are there substitutes for your product? So that's another thing you need to keep your eye on externally. Does somebody come up with a substitute product that would you know, take over? So sometimes I call these, I'll occasionally in a counseling session, I'll draw these bullseye model on there. I call it the customer segment bullseye model. In the middle, I say, okay, here's the customers that you deal with and all the business customers that you have in your segment. But there's the next ring outside of them are customers that are using your product, but would use anybody else's product if they could. But there isn't a real good option for them, right? It was all those people who had kiosks that had to use, you know, merchant accounts with their high fees and all the other kind of things that were designed for big Walmarts with big point of sale things, and you know what I mean? They had to buy a big freaking cash register, they had to buy all that stuff, they had to get telephone lines, everything else, because that's what they needed, right? They needed to be able to do that. You see what I'm getting to it? So we're trying to find, you know, are there substitutes? So when Square came out with their option, wow, those people left that market and they went with Square because Square was a better option. It was underserved market. Revenue attractiveness, right? Is there larger margins to be obtained in a particular segment, right? And is there price sensitivity, right? Within that, we call price elasticity. For example, if I raise my price, what does that do to my customers, right? We always want to find that maximum price. I keep raising it, and I can drop it down, and somewhere I'm going to hit the middle of that. So I'd like to tell another quick C story. When I was in Visible Fencing, we used to sell a self-installed kit for $750. Cost me about $350 all out the door for my thing. Everything else was part of my margin. And I remember complaining to the company one day, and I said, you know, quite frankly, it's just too expensive. They just look at this product and they go, it doesn't have, you know, I used to be an electronics guy. I look it up and I go, I could build this in Radio Shack. You know what I mean? It's a super heterodyne receiver. There's not much to it. It's AM radio. I could buy it. You know, I could buy the same technology in Radio Shack for $7. Why are you going to charge $750 for this thing? And they said, well, Steve, let's try an experiment. So why don't you sell it for $500 for a month, right? And then sell it for $1,000 the next month, right? Sure enough, for the month I sold at $500. You know what? I sold more at $500 than I did at $750. And remember, it cost me $350 in, right? So I only made $150 on margin. The $150 by the number of volume, I made less money. Does that make sense? Then that I went to $1,000. I sold only a couple that month. All right, but I made a lot of money on those. Okay, it's part of our, you know, economic model. We're talking business model here. It's an economic model discussion that we're having right here. So but quite frankly, I didn't sell enough to make it in there. So when it was all done, I had to go hat in hand back to them, and I said, you know what? $750. I actually make the most amount of money there. I did sell more when I lowered the price. I did sell less when I raised the price, but my margins were maximized at that. What I discovered later on, which I believe my theory, it was half the price of a chain link fence. All right, so to enclose my backyard was $1,500. I sold it for $750. They said for half the price, I'll buy that because it only does half the job. It only keeps my dog in, doesn't keep other dogs from coming in, right? And so they said I'm willing to pay half of that for that. Now I talked to them about other, you know, advantages of invisible fencing, you know, that didn't involve, you know, maintenance or, you know, that kind of stuff. But anyway, to make long story short, that's what I believe was part of the decision making process. Okay. Isn't that? Okay. Okay, we did go. Okay, so key trends. Now we're at the top of the piece. Okay. Now again, just to kind of go back here, market forces. What do they affect? Revenue and customer segments. All right. So now we're going to move over here to key trends, and they're going to affect customer segments, value propositions. This is why we draw this the way we do. Okay. So key trends that I like to kind of talk about. Technology. Right. Let's face it. The day I watched that truck drive from that Anheuser-Busch thing up in Denver, that auto truck, OTTO, whatever it was, drive driverless down the interstate and drop off beer here in Colorado Springs, was the day that I said, that was a pivotal moment, okay, that occurred. I mean, it navigated from one place to the other in a busy street with all these other kind of things and delivered packages. And that afternoon, I happened to be talking to my UPS driver who was dropping off a box, and I said, so, what are you going to do now? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, your job's going to be displaced. You're just driving this freaking truck. you know, because I've seen you here for the last 20 years, you know. And I said, what is your next career move? And he said, well, I figure I'm going to be driving this truck till I retire. And I go, I don't think so. I think your job's going to change. He said, how so? I said, well, here's what I think is going to happen. I said, I don't think you're going to be driving a truck anymore. I think you're going to be driving, it's going to be an autonomous vehicle. I said, you're not going to walk up on my driveway anymore either. I said, your job is going to probably be putting my package on a drone piece, retracting the ceiling, and the drones are going to fly. It's going to be like the Wizard of Oz and the monkeys leaving the castle, right? Kind of a thing. And that's what it's going to be like. Son of a gun, if I didn't see an article. A few days later, UPS out there, driverless UPS truck, retractable roof, drone deliveries. I thought, that's where the world is changing. So the concept here is key trends. What technology things are going to affect your particular business, right? Could be regulatory. Well, I will tell you too, right? Here's a good example. I tell time with us. I don't wear a watch anymore. I used to wear a watch. Right? I would never have expected, if I was a watch manufacturer, that this was going to, cut my industry in half. Okay? Regulatory. I put this in there for this particular thing. Import, export fees, tariffs, steel, aluminum. How's that affecting stuff? See what I'm saying? You don't control that. It's a key trend that's happening right now, right? Now there's all retaliatorial kind of, tariffs from other countries, and, when now you're growing soybeans, you're sitting there going, well, what do I have to do with steel? And now you can't sell your soybeans, right? Or you can't sell your pork, those kind of things, because they're putting tariffs on some kind of things like that. Taxes are another one, right? Incentives. Solar is a good example, right? Government gives you incentives to put solar on your roof, right? If you didn't have that incentive, we would never buy those, because it just doesn't make any economic sense to do that. So those are regulatory things. So sometimes the government wants to pick winners and losers, okay? And that's what we talk about. So you have to be able to keep your eye on the ground to determine, again, something that you don't control. But now remember, we're looking at our business model and we're sitting there saying, will it stand up in the real world? And in order to stand up in the real world, we need to be able to understand what's happening out there and how that's going to make a change. It could be social and cultural kinds of things. Wealth distributions, discretionary income types of things. Demand curves. Anybody heard of a guy by the name of Harry Dent? Very interesting economist. If you're interested, I have a file on stevebizblog.com called Demand Curves. You can download. And he looks at various industries. And what happens is every time we use the credit card, debit card, or loyalty card, and we talked about that before, and when people buy that, we also know demographic information, like how old you are, right? So an interesting thing, for example, normally I come on a motorcycle. It was like serious chance of rain, so I drove my truck here today. But normally I drive a motorcycle all over town. But you know what? There's a very interesting dynamic to people who buy motorcycles. They sell a little bit in the 20s, nothing through, the maybe mid-20s to mid to late 40s. Then there's this huge spike, and by the time you get to mid-50s, it drops off to zero again. Very, very predictable, okay? It makes sense, right? I'm single, I have a motorcycle, I get married, I have a family. Hey, I don't have as much disposable income anymore, I can't afford to keep it, so I get rid of it. Or mama says, to me, hey, guess what? You're not dying while I'm raising the kids, so get off that thing, right? Which happened to me. Then what ends up happening, kids are out of the house, right? Disposable income goes up. Man, I always wanted that motorcycle again. Bang, get back into the motorcycle deal again. Then you get to the mid-50s and you're going, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about retirement coming up here. I better be saving my money. You know what I mean? Also getting a little fragile, kind of a thing. And saying, those big bikes get a little harder to hold up, as you get atrophy in your muscles and stuff like that. So that's very predictable. Same thing if I look at minivans. Who buys minivans? Soccer moms, right? So you understand, things are sold based upon age demographics in a lot of cases, and income types of things. Harry plots all of those. So it's no surprise that 15 years ago, Harley comes out of bankruptcy, does wonderful, right, and is now a shell of its former self right now. Is thinking about actually offshoring its motorcycle production, less because of the steel and everything else that's going on there, but a lot of other kinds of things that are really going to tank that particular industry. But it's all based on age demographics. It's very, very predictable. Okay, but it's something that you can't control, but you can know where that is. So right now, you want to get into pets. You want to get into things, elder care. Do you know what I mean? These are hot markets right now, and they will be for a number of years. But, the circus will leave eventually, right, when those people die or whatever the case happens, okay? in socioeconomic kinds of things, marriage, living arrangements, race densities, change over time, you have to kind of factor that in. Okay? Those are things that ultimately happen. Okay? And I talked about living arrangements. I mean, I have a 28-year-old son who's married, just moved out of an apartment here. He's living at home again. I call him the yo-yo kid, because it's the second time he's gone back, to living with me. Now he's living there with his wife in my house. So I'm like, phew. But, I never did that. I mean, I moved out of my house. I was done. I was never going to live back with my parents ever again. But those things change over time. Industry forces, right? Competitors, right? Are there key competitors that are coming in, growing, fading, right? Are there dominant competitors in a particular industry, right? That are absolutely dominate the industry. If you want to get into diamond, selling diamonds, forget it. It's all wrapped up in De Beers. They own the market. For example, you want to get into, selling PC software. Listen, if you're not Microsoft, it's just not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's dominant players out there that kind of do that. You have a cost or competitive advantage and cost structures kind of factor in there. So these are I just want you to think about these and how they stand out. Are there new entrants, value chain entries that kind of go there? People expanding. A great example, like we talked about with the jet thing, right? I think Amazon, got a little rested on its laurels a little bit and said nobody can beat us for what we have here. We have this huge infrastructure thing, and then Walmart said, A plus B, put them together, I'll beat you. And I think Walmart's directly going after Amazon right now. So that's what we call value chain expansion. I mean, it bought Jet. Jet by itself was too small to do anything. Walmart wasn't in that same market. Put the two powerhouses together, bingo, right? Got a real thing here. Are there barriers to entry? Sometimes we have regulatory things. We have business licenses that preclude certain people from going in there. I always pick on remember the cosmetology person? I always pick on that industry. Because, if I want to be a barber, for example, I cut my own hair, but if I want to go ahead and hang out my shingle and cut somebody else's hair, I can't do it. I have to have a cosmetology license to do that, to be a barber. Now, I really do believe that the barbers got together and they simply said, hey, listen, it's too easy to go buy a pair of shears at Walmart for $20, hang out a shingle and say, I cut hair, right? So how can I go ahead and do that, right? So, I mean, some of us don't require a lot of effort to cut our hair,
Cut long.
Yeah, it's easy. Yeah. Right. So you get the idea. And so they create regulatory boundaries that prevent you from entering that, okay? And there are substitute products that can do in there. Something that can be replace your product. It's easier to use, something along that line. That's what we want you to be looking. We want you to be that person, to be that easier product to be able to use. And the last one that we're going to talk about before we go into our exercise is what we call macroeconomic forces, all right? Global conditions. We all know they go through boom and bust cycles, right? I mean, I was involved in the real estate business until, about 2006. It was pretty obvious if you kept your eyes open that the market was really overheated, right? There was way too many people chasing way too many deals. Do you know what I mean? I told my wife, I said, we're done. You know what I'm saying? There's still money to be had in there, but I'm telling you what, that house of cards is going to fall. Man, I was so glad I got out in 2006, because a year later, I'd have been stuck, right? But those affect global and local economies, right? I often talk about Becky, who's the person that you probably all talk to when you schedule your meeting here. She works at the SBDC. She used to live in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Do they call it Cape Canaveral? Cape Kennedy? I don't know. You know where it is, down there in Florida, where the Cape used to be. Business was booming back in the days of the space shuttle, right? Space shuttle program shuts down. Here you got literally rocket scientist is a greeter at Walmart. You know what I'm saying? That has some really effect on certain economies. So, but that didn't change what if you were a rocket scientist working for Elon Musk, in a different community. So sometimes it's local versus global. Sometimes it's a global downturn, sometimes it's local. So I would consider the housing market collapse was more global because it affected you, whether you're East Coast, West Coast, in the flyover states, whatever, everybody was affected by that versus, a very small market that crashed. Pueblo with their steel thing, when the steel they moved out, dramatic effect to the city, right? If Fort Carson closed tomorrow, boom, Colorado Springs definitely has some issues, right? Very high concentration there. Capital markets, right? Where does that go? Debt capital loans, for example. Interest rates are going up, right? That's affecting everything. If I want to buy a house, how do I buy a house? I buy a house based on payments, right? So if the interest rate goes up, the value of the home goes down. That's just how it kind of works. So interest rates go up. Who's paying for that? You are, by loss of equity in your particular property, right? Goes in there. Maybe it's what I'll call risk capital, which is investors, right? If you want to go ahead and find angel investors, Colorado Springs is not your good place. We do have some, but honestly, it's not rich, right? If you go to places like Boston and you're in a biomedical type of thing, you could find investors all over. You're in the financial sector, New York, got it. You're in the high-tech sector, Silicon Valley. They congregate in various corridors, okay? And if you don't live in one of those corridors, it's very difficult to get access to risk capital, so that kind of depends there too. And those kind of go up and down depending on what people are willing to do. And then cost of funds, which is your interest rates that you pay. Could be commodity types of things. Right now, one of the biggest problems that's occurring out there, it affects us entrepreneurs, right, is labor. Unemployment, what was it? I think it was like 2.8, 2.9%, something ridiculous. That's unsustainable. That, you know, as an employer, right? I mean, like for example, I had a conference this morning with a guy who says, listen, my biggest problem is I can't find a qualified guy, right? Because it's so hard to do that. Well, nobody wants to move to a city that has low unemployment. As a matter of fact, Colorado Springs even has lower unemployment than state as a national thing. So if you're, you know, the Regional Business Alliance, or what they call it, Chamber now, or whatever they call themselves now, that you're gonna have a hard time getting somebody to move from California out to here, because quite frankly, they're gonna go, well, once I put my business here, I can't hire anybody because you have such low unemployment, right? So you think unemployment, you know, bad being high, but it's actually good for economic development, those kind of things that really affect that, okay? Sometimes it could be the transportation infrastructure kinds of thing, right? I grew up in New York, right? You didn't need a car. You don't need a car in New York, right? I got, you know, buses, taxis, you know, subways, everything like that. There was no need to have a car. I mean, here, you don't have a car. I mean, I live right up here in Monument. I mean, there's no way. There's no bus service going to take me to the Springs. I mean, I'd have to hire an Uber to go to work every day. That just wouldn't work. All right? Okay? And, you know, quality of life is the final one that I would argue. Okay? So good quality of life. My son moved from here to Bentonville, Arkansas. Cheap cost of living there. Very nice place to live. Shell-shocked when he came back here, quite frankly. And came back here and said, my gosh, Dad, what happened to the prices here? You know what I'm saying? But I said, nothing really. I said, the fact is you just went away, and it was really cheap over there. And he comes back over here and said, well, I could have bought twice this house for the same price that I could pay right here, right? So quality of life has a lot to do with where you're going. I just had a client move to Pueblo because it was cheaper for her to operate down there than it was in Colorado Springs. So, okay. So I want to talk quickly about 11 common business models that we often see out there. And then we're going to go off to this exercise. We're going to take a quick break here in a minute too. All right? Individualized solutions. So if I have a landscaping company, and I'm going to go ahead and look at your particular property, you're a unique one-off kind of a gig for me. I'm going to have to look at it, I'm going to size them, I'm going to put a bid together. You're going to go ahead and hire me to do that. It's a one-off thing. There's no reproduction of that, right? Most services fall into that very specific solution. It could be what we call multi-component, right? You think about Pepsi, right? You can buy Pepsi in a bottle, and that's sold to consumers. But Pepsi also sells Pepsi in a box that you put into a fountain drink machine that they mix with their own water and their own CO2 cartridges for the restaurants, right? Same product, way different, business to business sales, business to consumer sales, sold in bottles, sold in boxes. Do you get what I'm trying to say? All right, kind of a deal. So multi-component, in other words, the same ingredients, but just sold in different ways and parted out. Market leader, need I say more, Microsoft kind of thing. They own that. It's kind of hard to displace them in there, so you're not going to probably be in one of those, but I just need to let you know that is one of the things. Maybe you're a valuable component, right? You're a B2B partner, right? Cummins, with their partnership, right, with Dodge, valuable component, right? Intel, for example, right? Valuable component, right? Intel inside, right? That's what you're doing right there, right? All those kind of things. So you don't actually sell to the consumer, you sell to another business, but they really couldn't do anything without you because you're a valuable component to that, right? Monopolistic, De Beers, right? The diamond people. I'm an oil guy, so I like Standard Oil. I had to put that in there, you know what I mean? Own the entire supply chain from getting it out of the ground to piping it to your refinery to getting it directly to the consumer. You know, they own the whole thing. That's why they broke them up, right? So it was a monopoly. Proprietary supplies. I think about Keurig, right? Keurig gives away their coffee pot, essentially. Actually, they don't even there's no margin on a Keurig coffee pot, right? When China is ones that manufacture them, essentially, let's say it's $100 is what the Kohl's might sell it for, and Kohl's is making their margin. You know, Keurig doesn't make any money on that. They sell it at cost, because what do? They make their money selling K-cups. Okay, they get an annuitized thing. So instead of selling one big thing, they sell many things. Okay, freemium is another one, very, very popular in this day and age. Password Keeper I use for my phone. Right, keeps track of all my passwords. Right, it's a free version. As long as I keep it on my phone. But I'll tell you what, the day I drop my phone in the toilet, for example, is the day my passwords disappear. Not acceptable kind of a thing. So they offer the pro version, which they'll take it and put it in the cloud. And oh, by the way, if I want to get a new phone, I can just go there and copy it down to my new phone. Or if I want to put it on my PC, I can do it, because it's all downloads from one central point, but you got to pay for that. But if you want the cheapskate version, you can do that, right? And upgrade it. Eyeballs, we talked a little bit about that, selling ads. In other words, I own eyeballs. I'm the archer guy, archery TV. People are watching me. I can charge a premium price because the cost per viewer, I can charge a maximum because every one of those people have something to do with archery, or they wouldn't be watching that show. Virtual goods is another one that today. Ebooks, right? You know, write an ebook, put it on the internet, right? I got no more cost associated with it. You know, I just get a check every month from Amazon that says, here, we've sold all these books, and here's your check. That kind of goes in there. Reference USA is another one. If anyone's not familiar with that, it's a tool the library has. I mean, the library pays like $100 grand a year, each year, to maintain access to that particular database for our community. But it's a virtual good, right? I mean, it sits there in the internet to be able to be downloaded. Once they populate that, you know, it's kind of like a software thing. There's no additional cost that goes into reproducing 1 or 1,000. And then a last tool I'll call Craftsman and Homemade, right? And I consider the Craftsman high quality, generally pricey. Homemade tends to be more, you know, low cost, low quality, Etsy kind of stuff. Does that make sense to you? So, you know, Craftsman, he's the guy that builds your custom bed, you know, with your family crest, you know, into the headboard. It's all very custom type of thing versus, you know, Homemade is, you know, the little flower pot with lights coming out of it to adorn your front yard or something like that, you know what I mean, type of thing. Okay, so we're going to take a break here, all right? This is the whole picture. We're going to take a break here, all right? You know what? Where did the exercise thing go? I guess.
You took it out the last time.
Did I? You know, because I think it was a tweener class. Oh, because you know what? This is the presentation I did up on the hill. Remember that? And there was no exercise there. So not a big deal. All right, so here we're going to do. We're going to take a break. All right, then we're going to come back here. How long do you need? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Take a